This podcast explores themes of murder and rape. Listener discretion is advised. The words of Aileen Wuornos are voiced by an actor.
She killed 7 men in cold blood.
She did not kill in self-defense, but instead was motivated by hatred of men.
There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything, because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system.
7 men murdered, only 6 bodies found. From 1989 to 1990, these men fell victim to sex worker Aileen Wuornos as she hitchhiked along Florida's highways. Some were just giving a woman in need a ride. Others parted money for sex. But they all paid the price, as picking her up cost them their lives. Was Aileen's murder spree fueled by rage and anger after decades of abuse at the hands of men? What's the real story of this rock-loving biker chick dubbed the Damsel of Death? Over the course of 6 episodes, we'll speak with detectives, witnesses, and experts to delve into the case of Aileen Wuornos, tracking her notoriety as America's first female serial killer, and question if she, too, was a victim. We will also deep dive inside the mind of a monster, hearing Aileen's innermost thoughts and feelings in letters she sent from death row to her best friend, Dawn. I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Season 5 of Mind of a Monster, Aileen Wuornos. Episode 1, Babe in the Woods. After World War II, Americans are experiencing a post-war boom with a stronger, more stable economy. Families have relocated to the leafy green suburbs for a better quality of life, and vacations are popular once again. 41,000 miles of interstate highways have been built across the U.S., opening up the country for all to see. But what nobody knows is that these very routes will fuel Aileen's murderous spree. It's Wednesday, February 29th, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. According to legend, leap year babies are lucky. But other superstitions say females born on this date become erratic and unpredictable later in life. Cue the arrival of newborn baby girl Aileen Carol Wuornos.
Dear Dawn, nearly 38. In 9 more days, but I'm really 8 this year. It's strange being a leap year child. They say leap years are lucky children. Oh yeah, what happened to my luck? Bullshit's all I've seen. Crappy world. God, how come? Not fair.
Aileen's parents are just teenagers when she's born. Her mom, Diane, is only 16 years old. They've had a volatile relationship, and Aileen never meets her dad, Leo, who's a diagnosed schizophrenic. He's locked up, serving a life sentence for kidnapping and raping a 7-year-old child. In a few years' time, he dies by suicide. As a small child, Leo was abandoned by his parents, and like her father, Aileen is about to lose contact with her only surviving parent. Days before Aileen's 4th birthday, her mom takes her and her older brother Keith to the home of their alcoholic grandparents who live in the nearby town of Troy. But Diane never returns for them. Aileen's grandpa Laurie was not only a heavy drinker, but a disciplinarian, beating her regularly with his brown leather belt. Sifting through a serial killer's early years can sometimes unlock an incident that holds the key to the secret of their violent trajectory. But for Aileen, it was a multitude of factors. So to really understand what Aileen went through as a youngster, we need to hear from the best friend she grew up with, who Aileen loved and trusted most.
My name is Dawn Bonkins, and I'm a friend of Aileen Wuornos's. We went to school in Troy. We used to skip school together until finally we quit. And so we had all day to hang out with each other and do different things that she liked to do. Troy was where we lived. It was a nice place. It was beautiful. It's just people were so judgmental.
You and Aileen were only teenagers when you guys became best friends. And in fact, Aileen was badly bullied. Would you say you were her only friend?
Well, yeah, she would complain that everybody treats her like crap. You know, that's why she don't hang out with them. She says, everybody treats me so mean, it's sickening. So I said, well, let's go find something to do, you know, and not talk about that. She finally had somebody who was accepting her for her.
And you guys were friends until the very end. What are your memories of hanging out with Aileen?
Oh, she did love that pinball place. We went there a lot because she liked to play pool. When all the other kids were around, she was very quiet because she knew not to start arguing with them and stuff like that. But when it was with her and I, when we would skip school during the day, we was always laughing because it was going to see a movie or a show. She liked to go to the mall shopping. She never got anybody would do that with her. I had fun with her.
Dear Dawn, I was a little shy as a kid, but spunky and full of adventure. I'd come across a hot interest that intrigued me so. Music. I fell in love. Dazzled in rock and roll. Hendrix, you name it. I was gearing up for a band, and school became my favorite thing to attend. But when third grade come along, it would take a turn for the worse, screwing up my joy of going.
Well, we went to Smith School, and that's junior high. And then we went to the high school. I hated school. I didn't like it. I just went there for my friends. But she had to go to school. And she was smart anyway, so she made sure she got them good grades for her grandma and grandpa. Which she did. She's very intelligent. She did like the music class. In fact, in those days, we had to sing. It was kind of weird. I don't remember participating too much in that, but she did. She loved art because she loved cartoons and working with colors. I know she did not like gym class. She didn't like other kids watching her.
And living with her grandparents, life didn't really improve for Aileen, did it?
No, at first it was good. You should see some of the beautiful clothes that grandma would make sure she had for school. Well, her mom, I call her grandma the mom, but she made sure they had the best clothes, her hair always done, the house was always clean. No, she was a good mom. Then grandpa started drinking.
And he didn't just like an odd drink. He was an alcoholic who would get super angry when he was drunk, right?
She tried not to be around that man. A couple of kids in her neighborhood actually showed up on court one day. I think that was Chauvin, yeah, it was. She said she saw him beating her through a door because he's so mouthy, wicked. He was starting to drink too much. He was getting mean with his mouth. She was horrible.
It's here that Aileen really starts spiraling out of control. But was the path already laid out for her? Dr. Jethro Toomer psychologically evaluated Aileen in custody multiple times. I want to know more about how her formative childhood years impacted her development.
Women learn how a man is supposed to treat a woman by observing how a father treats her mother. That's where they learn that. From the time she was born, was basically nothing more than a model for vacillation. When you look at her overall history, without some very, very significant, intense, profound intervention, you're scarred for life. You're not gonna recover unscathed from that kind of a history.
And with mental illness running through her family, Aileen could be predisposed to developing schizophrenia like her father.
Oh, by all means, because you tend to find that schizophrenia oftentimes runs in families. And so I think you'd have to definitely consider that. It's difficult oftentimes to get across in the criminal justice system and to the lay public that outward behavior is not always an accurate indicator of internal motivation.
And in Aileen's case, how did her upbringing contribute to these mental health factors?
One thing we know is that there are certain things that are necessary in order to help an individual. Safety, they need stability, they need predictability, sameness, And when those factors are missing, you've got shifting sand there as a foundation. So when you have an individual who grows up in an environment where they don't have these factors, as they continue to grow, they are dealing with instability, unpredictability, and what have you. And what they need is to know that the person who loves me today will love me tomorrow. The place I'm living today, I'll be living here tomorrow. When that's missing, individuals do not trust their environment, the people around them. And not only that, but their primary focus and energy becomes that of, how do I survive from one day to the next?
And her environment was very unstable. So on top of any genetic predispositions she might have toward mental illness, she's also been fielding physical and verbal trauma since birth.
When we talk about trauma, we aren't talking about isolated trauma. We aren't talking about one-shot trauma. This is persistent. This is repetitive. This is chronic. And so the person's entire life is influenced by this constant exposure to trauma. That has been shown to actually damage the brain. It changes the shape of the brain. There have been a number of studies here in the United States where they take kids who grow up in this type of an environment where there's violence and crime and whatever, and they look at their brains and compare their brain development to that of people from other areas who've not been exposed to this, and the brain is different. One thing, a question I always ask: what's your first recollection of where you lived, your parents, your mother, your father? She said her mother told her, "I tried to abort, but I failed." That was what her mother told her. That's one of the first recollections. At least that's what she indicated to me as her first recollection. I don't recall anybody ever really caring about her except the one woman who came to claim her ashes.
And that woman was Dawn Botkins, Eileen's only friend.
Dear Dawn, once I hit junior high, there went my good old morals. If it wasn't the cigs, it was the booze. If it wasn't the booze, it was drugs. If not all three at once. We'd just get out there and walk on down the boulevard shouting out, acid, pot, you name it, we got.
As a teen, Aileen starts having sex with boys for cigarettes and gets involved with drugs. Why didn't anyone of authority, whether it's police or parents of her peers or child services, why didn't anybody step up?
Because in those days, they didn't have it like it is now, and Amber Alerts and stuff like that. And they didn't pay too much attention to other kids and stuff like that. They always said, stick to your own family. Don't tell the family secrets and stuff like that, especially if anything's embarrassing. It was not like nowadays, that's for sure.
And things were only going to get worse for Aileen. So do you think if she had had help as a child and had a stable family life, would things have turned out differently for her?
It would have been way differently if somebody would have taken the time to do that, but they just wouldn't. She would never have killed anybody if she started getting help as a child.
The kids in Troy often ride their bikes down to the woods, known locally as the pits, starting bonfires and hanging out after school. Aileen goes along, hoping to fit in, but she is never included. Instead, the boys keep using Aileen for sexual favors. This is a young child we're talking about here. She's 14 years old. Some of those same kids judged Aileen for being sexually active. They'd bully her, mock her, and call her the cigarette pig or cigarette whore. She isn't welcome at parties either.
You say, you're nothing but a whore and stuff like that. That's just the boys, they were like that. The girls never said much. They just didn't talk to her. She hated that. After a while, she would drink too much, or somebody in there would drink too much or start accusing her of something, call her names. I always called her names. And she would get so defensive, they usually beat her up and threw her out of the party. I'm not kidding, they did. Just kicked her right out and slammed the door shut. And so I was sitting there with all my other friends. I says, I gotta go now. And they said, well, what do you mean you gotta go? I said, they just threw her out in the snow after they beat her up. I'm gonna take her to my house so she can warm up. Thanks a lot, guys. And I left. And we went back to my mom's house. Can't believe they kicked her out of the party that she was so happy to be participating in. But they wouldn't even let that happen. That's horrible, isn't it?
Aileen soon realizes her body can get her more than just a pack of cigarettes. She starts offering sexual favors in exchange for cold, hard cash. With a childhood like Aileen's, fraught with abandonment and neglect, it's no wonder she accepts this mistreatment from others. She might not even recognize it as abuse. Furthermore, there's some early indications of a burgeoning personality disorder in Aileen, which is expected given the neglect and her family history of mental illness. I'm not at all surprised that she would struggle with boundaries and self-worth. Dr. Tasha Jackson is based in San Francisco and is an expert on childhood trauma. I want to get her thoughts on Aileen.
My name is Tasha Jackson, and I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I specialize in relationships, relationship breakups, and trauma.
You just hit our first point right out of the gate. I want to talk to you about childhood trauma and the psychological damage associated with it and how that could lead to criminal behavior.
I mean, the amount of trauma this woman has been under is just enormous. And the trauma response can be very individual, but it can have a hypervigilance. It can be hyperarousal in the body. The brain is developing from, very early on, and the neuroplasticity is more so when you're younger, all the way up to 25. And so those times I think about, it's like, feed your mental health better in those times because the wiring is just forming. And of course, we have neuroplasticity all through our life, but even more so at that younger age. So having trauma, it sets in, it can just let the body just go on this high alert, kind of like a threat response in many ways. And so I look at this, Wuornos in a way of going, oh my God, just from very young, she had these threats being put to her. And what even just in her body did that create versus even the lens she started to see with her thoughts and feelings.
You mentioned the hypervigilance, that if you're in a constant state of hypervigilance, your body is being flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, and that in and of itself is bad for you.
Absolutely. You're flooded with all these hormones. And I think with her that was super interesting is you have the neglect. And I think that can be overlooked with trauma of how much invalidation neglect is. But also 4 years old and abandoned by your own mother. Well, you've already been abandoned another way by your father. And that abandonment, how can you even put words to that? In many ways, I look at her going, she's really resilient. How does she keep functioning through all of these different traumas? There is the obvious physical abuse from her grandfather, this sexual abuse, but also this neglect that happened individually by certain people in her life and collectively by her environment.
I love the perspective that you're adding to this because I had not looked at her as resilient. I looked at her as a survivor. And you mentioned something else, Tasha, that I hadn't thought about in a long time, and I had not thought about in this case until recently. Early maternal rejection has now been well replicated as a risk factor for future violence. The research is a little complicated, but essentially they noticed that there were other risk factors usually associated, but there was something, if you add early maternal rejection, the chances of becoming criminal later bumped up quite a high effect size. They attribute it to many things, but a lot of it is just neuronal development, just brain development, and how important attachment to at least one caregiver. And it becomes even worse if that child is institutionalized for any period of time. We'll see the effect grow. But you're right, that specific maternal rejection is not inconsequential.
Absolutely. We need one attachment figure that's healthy and secure continually. And if you look at her of the rejection from before 4, right? Like, whoa, that self-concept. When we have a lot of trauma before the age 7 or 11, really in particular, you turn inward that it's your fault. But here you go, your rejection from mother, and she goes on to her grandmother, right? And how present is she really? You know, if she's an alcoholic, how emotionally is she doing that emotional bit? But it seems like it was reported that it was a healthy, you know, the healthiest connection she's had, and it's that more maternal place. As much as this case is, okay, men are physically abusing her, women have left her. And so there is abandonment in that form.
By the time Aileen reaches her teens, her relationship with her abusive grandpa is non-existent, and Eileen's grandma has now fallen ill, her alcoholism leaving her incapacitated with serious liver issues. Eileen's life is spiraling, and it's about to get even worse. Soon, Aileen is being raped on a regular basis.
Dear Dawn, I found myself tied to a bed, spread eagle. Once I woke, was gang raped. I'd run into at least 3 of these brutal attacks, age 13. Animals. Then sadly, I was running into this with those I knew at parties, from high school and other towns. Solely taking advantage of me because I was drunk, stoned, and defenseless.
But soon, it isn't just the local boys taking advantage of her. One rape would change her life in ways she couldn't imagine.
The last to come, which hindered any more, well, for a while, would be from a ride I got after sneaking out to party. And this one would kept me pregnant at 14.
Actually, he was an older man, didn't have a wife or anything, but he would let the kids in her neighborhood, all the kids, come over and party at his house at night. They all had to be out of there at a certain time because they had to be home for school. And so they all left one night, but Aileen was too drunk to leave, and that's when everything happened. He kept her there and raped her. You know, she probably was passed out. Had nothing of knowledge of it, probably. Who knows? And so since he raped her, she got pregnant.
How old was he?
He was in his 60s then. So he was an older man. He's no longer here.
Wow. So he's in his 60s and she's just 14.
Yep.
Was this a big deal locally at the time, Aileen being pregnant?
Oh yeah, once it got out to all the kids in that neighborhood. And they're nasty when it comes to treating each other good. They say the evilest bad things, it's just horrible. But they just put her down so much, she just was no getting away from it. It was tough.
We need a minute here. Let's just sit back and recap what Aileen has gone through so far. She's only 14, but has already experienced abandonment, loss of a parent to suicide who she's never met, dealt with the knowledge that her father is a child rapist, endured physical and verbal abuse from her alcoholic grandpa, she's being bullied at school, she's doing drugs, she's drinking, having sex, being raped, and is now pregnant. Raped by a man old enough to be her grandfather. That's more collective trauma than any of us will ever experience or even hear about in our whole lives. And right now, she's still a kid. But despite all of this, no adult authority steps in to intervene. Dr. Jackson, this is an extreme case, but given all these factors, is it inevitable that Aileen turned out the way that she did?
I know this sounds crazy, but no. It's an unknown. She has a family history, right, of bipolar and schizophrenia, and usually that does not show itself until the 20s. And so was this like a landmine that wasn't even, the little thing wasn't even pulled yet to go off? So here you have this other part where her body already has this stress hormones and trauma building, and she's got a lens of abandonment, a lens of not people being there. Her neural circuits just on a different wavelength at this point. So I don't necessarily know if it was a setup just from the trauma, because people can recover. And at 14, that's a primal spot someone could have come in. And nobody was hearing her calls for help, though, because I don't think necessarily she was a volcano that suddenly exploded. I think she was more like an earthquake, and she was setting off little tremors here, but she was affecting herself more than others.
She could be just this powder keg ready to explode, and that's going to show up later. I mean, she might have had some prodromal schizophrenia signs, but we don't have any evidence of it. That could show up later. But what you're telling me is that even despite this, despite all these risk factors, she could either have genetic protective factors that could have stepped in and helped with her being resilient and perhaps led her to a better path. But if a human, any human, had popped in, even in the teenage years, she could have been nudged off of this deadly path.
Absolutely, yeah. And at the same time, it's like there's this thread that as a society we discount. This drinking and drug use, I mean, it's numbing, it's stopping the brain development, like all this stuff. It's just fire to all this, whether it be, the genetics or the environment. And then we kind of just write it off. Oh yeah, she's drinking, numbing the pain. But it's playing in her neurodevelopment. It's playing with her coping skills. I mean, and I think most of us hear this, her heart popping out. Of course, not, how is she going to soothe from this pain? I would be drinking too, but it is a big factor in somebody who has impulsivity.
Did anything jump out for you in terms of the trajectory of her mental health from childhood to becoming a serial killer?
Yes. So I felt that she had, from early childhood, she was calling for help, right? Like 3 years old, like anger issues. I'm kind of like, why didn't anybody step in, right? And as you can see it, she is calling out for help in different forms. A lot of her anger goes outward.
So she might not have really recognized the level of abuse she had suffered until she makes that switch from internalizing it to misbehaving externally and, starting to kill people. And then she's like, damn it, I was wronged.
The typical part of somebody who is antisocial, psychopath, right? You see some of these things of like, she wasn't fire starting. She wasn't killing animals. She wasn't like, shooting. She wasn't acting violent at others when she was younger. She was hurting herself in so many different forms. And then something switched. And she didn't necessarily, correct me if I'm wrong here, like even when she did get angry and take her anger outward onto others, it was very specific.
It was men.
It was very specific to men in a specific category of, feeling raped or taken advantage of during sex work.
It's March 1971, and outside it's freezing cold. Aileen is in Detroit, 25 miles south of Troy. She is alone inside a home for unwed mothers, waiting to give birth to her baby. Her grandpa has just kicked her out after finding out she's pregnant. Her grandma is too unwell to support her, but Aileen has no idea just how ill she really is. On Tuesday, March 23rd, Aileen gives birth.
Dear Dawn, when I was 14 and stuck in an unwed home, it was snowing outside. Only wish I could watch it come down now. I sure do miss its feel and touch. I hope there's a little in heaven. Boy, that kid was huge. The stretch marks from him racked my bod. Wound up naming him Keith in honor of my wonderful brother.
But Aileen never gets to see or hold her baby. He is taken away from her the second she gives birth and is put up for adoption. Eileen's grandma spends time with her in the unwed mother's home and is the only person to visit, much to her grandpa's disapproval. But just months later, her beloved grandma dies from liver failure after years of hitting the bottle.
She was the angel of the family, and I had no idea she'd been so sick for years. But she kept it all a secret, as I may have more than likely heightened her death with my craziness, so I felt incredibly guilty. I became crushed to the max, missing her beyond words.
Grandpa wouldn't have nothing to do with Aileen, wanted her out of the house, and then Grandma died, which really blew his mind, I'm sure. But he totally blamed that on Aileen, too. That's the one person she would write that she loved so much. So her grandma was always there, coloring with her and doing anything with her. She was a good grandma, apparently. And that's when Grandpa went nuts and just started drinking too much and kicked them all out.
With the death of Eileen's grandma and the baby being born, Grandpa Laurie is angry and grieving. He kicks out Aileen, and she is alone, homeless. No local families will take her in, so she heads down to the local woods, the pits, to make shelter, trying to find a way to eat and bathe. Anything to avoid her grandpa.
The man was turning himself into a wreck, into a manic depressive, causing all of us to want to run. And that we did. I wound up in the woods, homeless. It was a mess. A literal hell. Stuck out there in the cold, rain, and snow, struggling to survive. I'd pray I'd keep from catching anything as simple as a cold, only to get my butt up the next morning, bathing in the lake, ready for school.
How did Aileen cope in the woods?
Well, she liked being very clean, that's for sure. And living out in the woods and swimming in the cold isn't going to keep you clean. But she would go into the gas stations and wash her hair, because she was nuts on having her hair always brushed, always washed, always clean. And she would wash her clothes out and stuff like that. But none of the kids would let her come in the homes. But none of the mothers trusted Aileen, and stuff like that, because they heard about her having a baby and all that stuff. There was a rich house who also had like 13, I'll say, abandoned cars. And so every so often she would sneak in their yard and she'd sleep in their cars. She just learned how to survive the only way she could.
And this need to survive, needing food, shelter, just basic essentials, is that what kickstarted her sex work, do you think?
Yep. That's the only thing that kept her in it. Because she had to eat. She did smoke. Some of the guys would actually rent a motel, but they, when they were done, they would say, you can stay here for the night. She would have a room for the night, and she would get to take a shower and do extra stuff, just spend the time with herself, maybe order a pizza.
It must have been so hard for her. Did she ever confide in you about how she felt?
No, she really didn't, because I made sure I didn't bring up anything, why you prostitute, or had a baby, or bring up the kids in the neighborhood, or her mom, no, we just talked about whatever we was doing. Thanksgivings, she'd come over to my house because nobody would invite her in the house. She knows she didn't do nothing wrong. Somebody would talk to her, they all started calling her names, the boys treated her like crap, all her friends. It was just awful.
Her mom, dad, grandpa, local kids, and the older guy who raped and impregnated her. Just a few of the people who either abandoned or abused Aileen. It's 1972. Aileen is a high school dropout. A 16-year-old with no home, no support, no family unit. She needs a roof over her head and food on her plate. Sex work and hitchhiking brings in a bit of money, but I want to know how someone who suffers so much trauma being raped regularly can comprehend having sex for money. Surely that's got to be a huge trigger. I want to hear Dr. Tasha Jackson's thoughts on this.
She has all this trauma around sexual, rape and physically abused. And then she continues, but I look at Maslow's hierarchy, and she's just trying to get fed. And so what she knows to get money is to do sex work. And so we could go down a psychological rabbit hole, which I will next, but it could just be as basic as she just needs food. And this is how she knows how to get food. She doesn't have to go and get rejected from a job. Then there is what can happen with trauma sometimes is we put ourselves back into the same situation over again. And often this can be someone trying to fix and heal from that old trauma. She's putting herself back into this place of like, okay, well, maybe men are okay. Maybe they are this place of they can be good at times.
I hadn't thought about maybe the sex work being good for her. I mean, not ultimately, but it does make her feel a little bit better because for that moment in time, she's actually wanted.
You know, a lot of trauma victims who've had sexual assault, they feel really guilty for getting some pleasure out of it at some point. I know that's really horrific to talk about, but there is a place of pleasing a person. When we're really young children, we like to please. It's programmed in us. And so then it gets really complicated when we get violated, but at the same time, we get that sense of pleasure from another person. And it just gets really confusing. And that's when a lot of people have this sexual trauma and then feel really guilty and shame because they're like, okay, at what level did I play a role in this? And then just sit with just not being able to talk about it or recover from it. Just, it adds a big complexity to it.
And we know that Aileen had a huge want to please and be wanted. And sex work is a way for her to feel a sense of control and being needed, something she had none of her entire childhood.
When I was reading about her saying that she did sexual favors for food and belonging when she was younger, she had that sense of belonging through this. So as much as we look at, you know, I don't know what her take is on sex, but there is a place that it's your body being connected to another human being. And it's that part of, okay, we can have some connection. It may not be a great connection, but she had no connections. So was she taking something that was really awful as something, as a sliver of it to feel good? I don't know. There's all these possibilities. So was it just for food? Was it replicating trauma again to heal from it? Or was she potentially, this is a sense of belonging and she had nothing else?
She killed 7 men in cold blood.
She did not kill in self-defense, but instead was motivated by hatred of men.
There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system.
7 men murdered, only 6 bodies found. From 1989 to 1990, these men fell victim to sex worker Aileen Wuornos as she hitchhiked along Florida's highways. Some were just giving a woman in need a ride. Others parted money for sex. But they all paid the price as picking her up cost them their lives. Was Aileen's murder spree fueled by rage and anger after decades of abuse at the hands of men? What's the real story of this rock-loving biker chick dubbed the Damsel of Death? Over the course of 6 episodes, we speak with detectives, witnesses, and experts to delve into the case of Aileen Wuornos, tracking her notoriety as America's first female serial killer, and questioning if she, too, was a victim. We will also deep dive inside the mind of a monster, hearing Aileen's innermost thoughts and feelings from letters she sent from death row to her best friend, Dawn. I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Season 5 of Mind of a Monster, Aileen Wuornos, Episode 2, From Rags to Riches to Rags. Welcome to the Sunshine State on this hot June day of 1976. Daytona Beach, Florida is where the party is. Harley Davidsons cruise by, girls rollerblade down the strip, and hundreds of college students soak up the rays, as well as the beer. Americans are flocking to the coast, including 20-year-old Aileen Wuornos. She's hitchhiked her way almost 1,000 miles to escape Michigan, doing sex work for cash along the way. To get a feel for the place, I want to speak with someone who knows the Daytona Beach area inside and out. Retired Chief of Police for Marion County, Brian Jarvis, led the Wuornos case. Brian, you worked in the area. Tell us what it was like in the late 70s and 80s.
Daytona Beach in the 1980s was a haven for partying. I guess that's about the best way to put it, because you would have a bunch of spring breakers that would go there over spring break. You would have a large summer crowd, people coming for the winter. So year round, it was hot. The atmosphere itself was very lively, a lot of alcohol, a lot of partying, and overall. Yes, there were some families also that visited, but I think the younger crowd was more dominant at the time.
Kind of a fun party place. It must have been interesting to work the streets as an officer. Could you describe Aileen Wuornos to us? What was she like?
Aileen was a drifter that basically had no childhood. There wasn't anybody that wanted her. And I'm not making excuses, like that's no reason for you to grow up and kill people, but she had a horrible childhood. Bottom line, it was very, very bad. And as she grew older, she started traveling a little bit more. She migrated to the Daytona Beach area, which she loved. She absolutely adored going to Daytona Beach. It was just the scene that she liked, just the kind of places that she could hang out in. She would prostitute to make money. She would, I guess you could say, play a tough role and try and make it seem like she was tough, and I'm sure she was. But the problem that she had was that when she was, let's say, in a good mood or in a normal mood, it just took the flick of a switch. It was just something that would set her off, and she would just go 180 degrees and become a different person, where she would now be violent and nasty and yelling, and you wouldn't know when that would come. You wouldn't know what would set her off. But something would always change it for her.
And it's that switch in her mood that begins Aileen's path of criminality. 2 years before arriving in Daytona Beach at just 18, she's arrested in Colorado for driving under the influence, disorderly conduct, and firing a gun from a moving vehicle. In Florida, she's still hustling and picking up guys along the coast to make a quick buck. But her hopes of a fresh start here will be short-lived. But to really understand her descent into crime, we need to look further into her past. What was Aileen's criminal history like before she started killing?
Prior to doing this, she had a couple of arrests. And there really wasn't anything with that much of a violent nature as we saw. She was arrested for destruction of property. She was arrested for possession of a weapon at one point. She had a forgery in Florida. She had possession of a firearm also in Florida, but nothing where she was physically attacking that I can recall that she was ever charged with.
You mentioned that Aileen could snap or switch from docile, calm to aggressive right away. Was that a history for her? Was that common? Or is that something that happened after the killings, as far as you know?
There were times when we were documenting her background where that came out. For example, there was an instance when she was in Troy, Michigan, where she was playing pool, which was one of her favorite pastimes. And there was an incident there where she ended up going off on somebody, getting into a bar fight, breaking and damaging some of the property in the bar. So there were times that we did see that in the past.
By the age of 20, Aileen's been arrested more times than most criminals are in their entire life. And of course, she's also a sex worker. Thinking back to the 80s and 90s, how common was it to see sex workers along the highway?
The sex worker trade back then, it depends on where you were, would be moderate to heavy in some areas. The interstates, the truck stops, the places where they felt most likely to be able to pick up a job. Is where you would see them, not necessarily just walking around town, but at the high volume areas where they thought they could make money, that's where you would see them.
Okay. And was it a risky line of work at the time?
It was at times risky, And again, you're taking a chance. You're going with a complete stranger. And typically the female's going to be not as strong as the male, just typically speaking. And yes, it could get violent, but we didn't see this much violence. Now, I'm not saying they reported it all the time either, because there were certainly enough cases where they would go on with their jobs and not report something. So you wouldn't get an accurate representation there.
As we know, Aileen never met her father, who died by suicide in prison. She was also abused and made homeless by her alcoholic grandpa. Ultimately, she never had a strong role model to guide her onto the right side of the tracks. In May 1976, Aileen is hitchhiking around Daytona Beach and meets a millionaire yacht club president by the name of Louis Gratz Fell. It was a bizarre and unexpected whirlwind romance, like something out of a fairy tale. But she was 20 and he was nearly 70 years old. A poor girl from a broken home meets a rich guy, falls in love, and just weeks after meeting, they get married. I want to know what Aileen's best friend Don Botkins made of it.
That is crazy. He picked up Aileen, prostitute, and felt sorry for her, and must have took a liking to her looks and thought she was cute. And she was polite, as she normally was polite to everybody, till she drank too much. But he felt sorry for her, so he said, well, why don't you come to my house? So she did. And then she was there quite a bit. No more hitchhiking. He was taking her off the streets. He felt like he was doing her. Good thing. Marry me and you'll never have to go back on the streets again and all that. He was trying to do a good gentleman thing, an elderly man doing things, trying to get her off the streets and take care of her and give her whatever she needs until she gets her life better.
You say he was being a gentleman, but this guy's old enough to be her father, or even her grandfather.
That's why I say gentleman, because of his age. I don't know if he was really a good gentleman or not, but probably. Usually you are when you're in your 70s. You lived a full life. And for him to even feel sorry for her, to have her come live in his home so she can get herself together, he had to be a pretty caring kind of person.
I personally don't believe this is operating here, but in psychology, something referred to as the father complex is thought to develop when a person has poor or non-existent relationship with their father from birth or early childhood. The thought is that if there's an absence of approval, support, and love, which continues into adulthood, this may result in bad decisions with future romantic relationships. Sounds like Aileen, right? I believe there's a lot more to it, but I want to get the thoughts of childhood trauma and relationship expert Dr. Tasha Jackson.
This woman's just trying to get by. And it's interesting when I read some of the reports of someone saying in the trial she was very primitive. I'm like, yeah, she's just trying to get food and love. And whether that love is that craving from a father, I think she's just trying to find love in general, in any form she can, and a belonging. I didn't hear that in the report that she's willing to do anything to make that marriage work.
I get that sense as well. What fascinates me about Aileen, though, is that so many serial killers never develop emotions like love and empathy. And given Aileen's mental health and the fact that she had the ability to kill 7 men, does she even have the emotional capacity to make a marriage work?
Does she have the ability to maintain a relationship is a really good question. Impulsivity, her mood swings, she's unstable in her life in general. But I look at it, what attachments did she keep? She obviously kept this Dawn friend through a lifetime. She kept Keith. But what was that environment that she was around? She'd really need somebody who's super stable, who's supportive, who could hear her. Like, what are those triggers of that person? But again, it kind of goes to, I don't know, of like her genetic makeup. Like if somebody is in a constant state of psychosis, nothing's good, like that's going to be hard. I just kind of wonder what has been normalized for her of or expectations for men. Expected for them not to be there. Expected them to abuse her. This is the way men are for her. My gut is there's a place in her where she believed men were not all this way. And I kind of wonder if she tried to prove it at times.
The marriage is the talk of the town. A big announcement and picture of the newlyweds is splashed across the local paper's society section. It's a major pivot point in Eileen's life. If this works out, she'll never have to do sex work again. But her new husband's upper-class circle never accepts Aileen, and her only sliding doors opportunity isn't meant to be. Dawn, as Eileen's best friend, do you think this marriage was the one chance she had to turn her life around?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe with you 100%. He was trying to fix something that was broken. That's a terrible way I just put it, I know. But that's what he was trying to do. And it just didn't work out that way.
Aileen was never accepted by the people in Michigan. Was she ever welcomed by the high society millionaires her new husband mixed with?
No, she probably would for a little while. But she was used to doing what she wanted, always being out at night and being a prostitute and doing the things she wanted to do and going to bars. He wasn't doing those kinds of things. Smoking away and drinking away and arguing whatever with somebody and all that. She would never have stayed like they are down there now, people with a lot of money and all that. They watch their manners, they watch what they say, and they're pretty kind. You know, that just wouldn't have happened to her.
Just weeks after exchanging their vows, Louis Gratz-Fell takes out a restraining order against Aileen, claiming she hit him with his own cane. The marriage is quickly annulled.
She hit him with his cane. I beg to differ. I think he probably hit her. I don't care if it was just her butt or something, saying, "Go on, get out of here. I don't want you here no more." Because she turned probably into drinking. And so that ended real quick.
In one of her letters to Dawn, Aileen clearly expresses how she feels toward men.
Guys do not, I repeat, do not care about girls, only for what they can give them. Their real love is sex. They don't know what love means.
Feeling angry, betrayed, and humiliated, Eileen's anger issues spark up once again inside a local bar, and she's arrested for assault. Eileen's riches are unraveling to rags. After failing to turn her life around in Florida, she hitchhikes back to Michigan just 1 month later, in July of 1976. On the verge of being mentally and emotionally tipped over the edge, the imminent death of a loved one will soon send Aileen into a dark, dark place. In July 1976, Aileen is not only dealing with a recent annulment, but also that the news that her big brother Keith is gravely ill with cancer at a medical center in San Francisco. Desperate to see him, but with no cash, she hitchhikes to visit him. She gets lucky, and a construction worker gives her $100 to help out. Dawn, Eileen's best friend, has been visiting Keith for the past few months.
It was sickening. He couldn't feed himself no more, and he answered me with his eyeballs. That's the only way he could just move him up or down or backwards. He was just, his time obviously was here.
Aileen uses some of the money given to her to buy Keith presents, a wooden flute, a book to read, and a Bible. When she arrives at the medical center, she finds her brother lying in a bed, alone in a hospital room.
Dear Dawn, he said, "Don't freak out when I pull the sheet down." My eyes immediately filled with tears as they widened to 50-cent pieces. The tumor was so huge on his neck. I kept telling him, "I'm sorry, I'm bawling my eyes out, Keith, but man, this is really scaring me."
It isn't long until 21-year-old Keith passes away on July 17th. It's the final straw. Aileen tries to shoot herself in the stomach. Over the next 2 years, she tries to kill herself with a gun again and again. 6 attempts by the time she reaches her 23rd birthday.
I think she tried to commit suicide 2 different times, but I do remember the gun thing, not that it's brought up.
She must have been in a really bad place to do that.
Real bad, to shoot yourself in the stomach.
I mean, Keith's death must have hit her hard because she really cared for him.
Oh, she couldn't believe it. Well, she really loved him, but they didn't hang out together. Too many years difference. She came home for his funeral and actually seeing him in his casket, how skinny he was and how much weight he lost and how much he had suffered, the pain he went through. She felt terrible about that. And so that was awful.
As her friend, how does it make you feel looking back at all she went through as such a young woman?
Well, when I think about it, geez, now that we've been talking about this stuff, her being raped and getting pregnant, then going to an unwed home, people she don't even know, then her grandma coming down there, and she loved her so much, and then her dying and Keith dying, that was a big lot. And trying that, shooting herself. Now I feel really happy for her that she's finally up in heaven with her brother and my brother.
Having had so many failed relationships and now the loss of her beloved brother, Aileen is at an all-time low. She has little to live for. The stage is set for her serial killing spree to begin. It's the 1980s. Florida is flooded with cocaine, 70% of it coming into the U.S. via the shores of Miami, at the time dubbed the cocaine capital of the world.
In the drugs business, all roads lead to Miami, Florida, America's biggest banking center outside New York. It's the gateway to Central America and the cocaine warehouses. The Medellin cartel's investment in South Florida real estate is estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars.
Originating in Colombia, trafficked through the Bahamas and the Dominican Republic, President Ronald Reagan creates a task force to try to take down the drug lords. But the multi-billion-dollar cocaine trade has ballooned to such heights that it overtakes the traditional economy. Drug war violence becomes endemic in Florida. Miami alone has 621 drug-related murders in 1981. At one point, there are so many dead bodies that the city morgue is forced to store the overload in a refrigerated truck.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions. They're killing our children. From the beginning of our administration, we've taken strong steps to do something about this horror.
And with the drugs comes turf wars, dirty money, and an unprecedented number of homicides. Retired Marion County Chief of Police Brian Jarvis recalls how common this all was. At this time in Florida in the 80s, the cocaine cowboys had control over large areas and many homicides were linked to them. Did police ever assume they could have been responsible for this and that these killings could have been drug or gang related?
We had a lot of homicides. You have to understand, in Central Florida, we had a lot of other homicides as well. And when we talk about some of the cases in Marion County, other detectives are saying, is that real? I mean, did you guys make this stuff up? There can't be that much violent crime there. But there was. It really was. When you start working a homicide, you don't preclude anything. You follow the evidence and see where it takes you. And it could have been drug-related, it could have been cartel-related, or the cocaine cowboys, possibly any one of a number of organized crime syndicates that you might see.
And as we'll soon find out, Eileen's weapon of choice wasn't what those involved in the drug killings would typically use, but it meant that police had to consider that organized crime might have been involved with at least their first kill, right?
Yeah, so you have to weigh your evidence and see where it takes you. Typically, the drug killings would be a lot more violent than this. They're not going to be using .22 caliber. There were a lot of instances where they were mutilating bodies or cutting off body parts or doing things so that they couldn't be identified as easily. This was not the case here. But you keep an open mind and see where it leads you to.
Bodies found shot and dumped along the side of the highways are now familiar sights. A perfect, yet completely coincidental decoy for a female serial killer. It's 1986, and we're in the Zodiac Bar in Daytona Beach, a regular hangout for bikers. Eileen's taking a break from sex work, playing some pool and drinking beer. She's trying to get over a fresh breakup from her first girlfriend. After what she's gone through as a child, a fresh dose of betrayal and rejection has woken the beast inside of her.
Dear Dawn, Tony was my first lesbian encounter, living together after a year. After I bought her all the equipment for a cleaning business, around $4,000 or so, she up and left me. I was so in love with her. Her ripping me off didn't bug me, but I just wanted her back. Bad. I was hanging out sudsing up all the paint at this bar, and suddenly this big guy walks in. Out of the blue, he mouths off, "I'm gonna kick your lesy ass black and blue all over this bar." My head in seconds blew up in a heated rage. I slammed my beer down and jumped his ass like greased lightning, kicked the fuck out of him.
This is a major pivot point for Aileen. For years, she's taken the abuse, but this time, she's retaliated, and in a big way. Not only is Aileen genetically predisposed to violence, but her upbringing is filled with trauma, violence tarnishing her early life. And this is the first real indication of how it's affected her. When pushed, Aileen can explode at the slightest provocation. I spoke to Dr. Tasha Jackson about how this has developed. What we're seeing here might be an artifact of her complex trauma, one trauma bleeding into another trauma, but they're manifesting into violent behavior.
We have triggers, right? And learned triggers. She had violence with men. She learned, whether I don't know what happened in the early pre-verbal stage of her parents at her home before 3. Violence, though, right? And then violence with the rapes, violence, physical abuse from her grandfather. Those are the triggers to that part of that body coming up and acting out in that violent way. So absolutely, it does make sense of this is where I need to fight. There's my trigger to the fight or flight. It's going to come out here. That being said, when she got a loss of one of her lesbian relationships, and she said in a letter, I was not upset about it. I was okay with it. How much insight does she have? She's just been abandoned. Again, a trigger of abandon from another woman. And was this a trigger from her abandonment of women in the past? As a lover, did she take her anger out? The water's already boiling. And then she hits it and she goes with a man and they do something and then it sets off into it.
And her being set off, like the bar fight, shows that when her short fuse is triggered, just the smallest thing can make her lose control.
If you think of somebody who's come back from war and combat, literally she went to war and combat, right? Then you have that person with maybe a PTSD response, let's say fireworks on the 4th of July, and it gets, the response is there. And they act out, right? You have the flashbacks, you're in the moment, everything feels like you're back in combat again. And we have empathy for them, right? Oh my God, you have served our country, you have done all this. And here you go of did something similar to her happen like this? She is being triggered, she's right back in the moment, flashbacks, and boom. It's not other places for her.
A few months on, and Eileen's back shooting pool in the Zodiac bar, chucking cents in the jukebox, and having beers with her new love interest, a 24-year-old woman named Tyria Moore. It's deja vu. As with her ex-girlfriend, it's another whirlwind romance. They live with each other just weeks after meeting. Tyria, known as Ty, is a motel maid. Aileen claims her income from sex work supported her and Tyria.
Dear Dawn, I had regulars I was happy with. Prostitution is my guilt and it led me to violent Johns. But cold blood murder? No. I should have quit after the first incident in prostitution. But due to a love beyond words for Tyria, I continued to hustle. I still love her to death.
Dawn, from the letters Aileen wrote to you, it sounds as though she would have done anything to keep Tyria happy.
That's absolutely true.
Do you think Tyria truly loved Aileen in the same way Aileen loved her?
Not a chance. But I'm sure she loved her because she gave her everything she wanted. You know, it's all about partying and going out to carnivals and stupid stuff like that. And Aileen, no matter how exhausted she was, if she'd been up all night, would make sure that Ty got all that. She loved her with her heart and her soul and her mind and all. She loved her that with all that. Ty loved her just maybe with her heart, a little bit.
So Aileen was doing as much sex work as possible to make money.
That's true. Trying to make sure she had everything for her and so she could at least get some rest and sleep. But she wanted everything to be perfect. She really loved Ty. She loved her with all her heart.
Aileen becomes so infatuated and desperate to keep hold of her that she will do anything in the name of love. It won't be long until the bullet-ridden body of Eileen's first victim is found, and the hunt for a serial killer begins.
Dear Dawn, you wouldn't have wanted to know me in '89. Oh, I was evil. The devil had my britches strapped. No kidding. A mental mess because of the stress of society I had endured for years. Males are the very cause of women in distress.
It's just 2 weeks before Christmas. Not far from Daytona Beach, 2 scrap metal hunters have just stumbled upon an unexpected find. A decomposing body bundled in a carpet and dumped in undergrowth near Interstate 95 and US 1. The body is 51-year-old Richard Charles Mallory. Mallory's beige 1977 Cadillac had been found abandoned 12 days earlier near Ormond Beach, several miles away from where his body would be found. David Taylor is a retired investigator. He worked alongside Brian Jarvis, who we met earlier on the Aileen Wuornos case. I want to know what he recalls from this gruesome discovery.
His body was found in a remote wooded area, even though it was fairly close to highly traveled areas like the interstate and some other U.S. highways. His body was off the roadway far enough as to where once you were inside, it looked like you were in the middle of nowhere. His body was found, had been rolled in a carpet. One arm had been extending out of that carpet. 2 guys that were out looking for junk that had noticed this carpet with the hand sticking out, but also they found a couple birds that was pecking on the guy's arm. So when they got closer, they were able to distinguish that it was in fact that of a human arm with advanced decomposition present. They are the ones that notified law enforcement by calling 911.
Wow, that visual of the birds pecking on his arm, that's pretty intense. From the information that the police had, what sort of man was Mallory?
So what we had learned about Richard Mallory, he was a electronics type of a guy. He did, back in the day, VCR repair. He would like to visit strip joints. He would like to hang out with, for lack of a better phrase, go-go dancers. So that was the lifestyle that he engaged in. What do we call that in the business? We basically call that, he's engaging in high-risk behavior. So, a lot of things happen at those type of environments. People are susceptible to be preyed upon, to be victimized, be robbed, etc. So, and that's where a lot of things do happen in that type of environment. So once we understood that, that helped us to paint a social picture of who this guy is and what he does.
They're able to identify Mallory through fingerprint analysis because his prints are already on file for what, at the time, is described as a minor criminal infraction. David, not only was it hard to identify Mallory at first, but this is someone with a colorful background. It's a complex case. What's the next step for police?
He was in what we would call an advanced state of decomposition. So he was not instantly identified, and it was days before a positive identification was made on his remains. As far as Richard Mallory, one of the very first things you do in an investigation is once you have the identification established, you have to work feverishly to identify what did this guy do those last 24 to 48 hours prior to his death? You want to know where he's been, who did he talk to, when did he last eat, what were his habits, what places did he like to frequent. So in every one of these locations, the game plan is, hopefully you can find some people that had contact with him that could tell you a little bit about who he is and what he does and his social habits. And also, you're looking for at what point did his path cross with the offender.
On November 30th, 2 weeks before his body is found, Richard Mallory is driving along Interstate 75 when he spots a young woman, Aileen Wuornos. He picks her up with the intention of paying for sex, but it does not go to plan. After they pull over, Aileen shoots Mallory 4 times in the chest. But as Brian Jarvis recalls, the murder weapon is unusual.
We'd found that he had been shot with a .22 caliber weapon, which at the time it didn't mean anything. The fact that it was a .22 turned out to be a big part of the case. But at the time, it was just a case where a .22 was used. And that's not your typical weapon of choice when you're carrying a weapon. That's typically like something you go for plinking or target shooting or something, not something you'd typically carry around.
But there is another twist in this tale. Aileen will later tell police she shot him dead in self-defense. She says he raped or tried to rape her. Truth or a lie? It will soon unravel that a vital puzzle piece about Mallory's past isn't showing up on police checks. It turns out Aileen might not be the only one with a violent criminal history. This first kill certainly won't be her last. 1 man down, 6 to go.
She killed 7 men in cold blood.
She did not kill in self-defense, but instead was motivated by hatred of men.
There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system.
7 men murdered, only 6 bodies found. From 1989 to 1990, these men fell victim to sex worker Aileen Wuornos as she hitchhiked along Florida's highways. Some were just giving a woman in need a ride. Others parted money for sex. But they all paid the price, as picking her up cost them their lives. Was Aileen's murder spree fueled by rage and anger after decades of abuse at the hands of men? What's the real story of the rock-loving biker chick dubbed the Damsel of Death? Over the course of 6 episodes, we will speak to detectives, witnesses, and experts to delve into the case of Aileen Wuornos, tracking her notoriety as America's first female serial killer, and question if she too was a victim. We will also deep dive inside the mind of a monster, hearing Aileen's innermost thoughts and feelings from letters she sent to her best friend Dawn from death row. I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Season 5 of Mind of a Monster, Aileen Wuornos. Episode 3, Damsel of Death.
What I had was a temporary mental breakdown of which 18 years of severe abuse I withheld inside too long. The burdens I thought I could weigh out with a master's degree and 17 years of courageously holding in would finally explode to weakness of the kill.
In November 1989, 51-year-old electronics shop owner Richard Mallory solicits Aileen for sex work, picking her up along the highway in Volusia County, Florida. But he gets more than he bargains for and is murdered, shot 4 times through the chest. His decomposing body is rolled in a carpet and dumped in undergrowth, just off Interstate 75. He's not found for another 2 weeks. I speak to David Taylor, who was a lead detective on the case. The Mallory investigation did seem to go cold for a period of time. Tell me more about that.
The Richard Mallory investigation it did go cold for a while. And remember, that was the first in a series of homicides that she was involved in. Volusia County investigators, they were looking at several suspects in this case. They eventually identified a suspect in this case, and her name was Chastity Marcus. And eventually, there was a warrant issued for Chastity Marcus. And if memory serves me correctly, she was actually arrested in another state, and she was brought back to the state of Florida. But as fate would have it, and it happens all the time, they worked the case more and more and more. But eventually, the case didn't get better. It became less likely that she was, in fact, the one that had killed them. Because once in a while you get information, well, actually, a lot of times you get information that sounds good right out of the box. But then when you work that information, sometimes you learn that it's just not credible and it's not competent. So, yeah, the case did go cold.
With Chastity no longer a suspect, the police struggle to work out who's killed Mallory and why. Meanwhile, Aileen and Tyria are hanging out in biker bars and getting by with cash Ty's making as a motel maid and the money Aileen is bringing in as a sex worker. Aileen believes their love can withstand anything. But when she confides in Tyria about the murder, it doesn't pan out as she hopes.
Dear Dawn, I was obsessed over her. Sorry, but true. I was madly in love with her. After Mallory's death, though, fear swept over her, and she became distant, I angrier. She merely hung on, so I wouldn't seek retaliation in my rage state. And sadly, she knew I'd lost my mind.
Aileen's best friend, Dawn, tells me what she knew about Richard Mallory.
Just he was a drinker, too. And he started out having a good time. He said, good, she's a hooker. So he said, we'll find a spot. So it was all in a good mood at first. Then I think he got drunk and took advantage of the situation. Well, he knocked her out.
When you visited Aileen in custody, from what she told you, do you believe he tried to rape her?
Oh, he did, actually. Because that's the one that was the worst for her. Because he put rubbing alcohol on her crotch after putting a pole up it. It's pretty sickening. I burned her so bad. It was a good thing and a bad thing. As bad as that burnt, that's the very thing that got her out of that jam. Because she got herself completely all untied. Reached out and got the gun to shoot him and got herself free.
And what else did she say he tried to do to her?
It was just wicked, she said. It was wicked. He did so many different things to her. And I think what upset her also is because she knew he was going to chop her up. Because he pretty much said that. You're going to die. Or hold her down so I can rape her and rape her more. That devastated her. She very much saved her own life.
As Dawn recalls, Aileen has always insisted that Mallory attacked her. But what isn't revealed at the time, and not ever mentioned in court, is that he has previously been convicted of a crime against a woman. I want to know what the police make of this. Now, it was discovered way after Aileen was charged that Richard Mallory had actually attacked a woman back in 1957, and according to this report, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity to a charge of assault with intent to rape, and then he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. But after a psychiatric evaluation, apparently he spent 10 years in a mental institution. David, how come this wasn't found out earlier? The jury never heard this information, and it obviously could have supported Aileen's claims of self-defense.
One of the things that happens in any criminal investigation, especially a homicide investigation, you have so much ground that is covered in such a short time frame. And you try your very best to uncover everything you possibly can about the victim. You want to know who your victim is, more so than the family knows about them. In this particular case, it was one of those things where during the trial, information came to light that Richard Mallory, in fact, had a history. He had a violent history back in his really younger days involving sexual violence. That information was, in fact, turned over to the prosecution team. And that information was, in fact, shared through the rules of discovery with her counsel. And, of course, now when you're in the middle of trial, what do you want to do? If you're the attorneys on her side, you want the jury to hear this. But the judge is the gatekeeper of the evidence, and the judge will make a determination, yay or nay, if the jury can hear that evidence. Is it relevant? Is it material? Is it trustworthy? Is it reliable? In this particular case, the judge ruled that the jury would not hear the evidence of his prior sexual violence events that occurred in another state. And once the judge ruled, that was it. The jury did not get to hear it. So that information did come at the later stage of the investigation, but it was in fact vetted through the judicial process.
So then when was it that the details of his previous charge were uncovered? Was it during the trial or was it before the trial?
I think it was just prior to the trial. I don't remember the exact date. I actually have a copy of the entire report. I've read it. The report that I have paints a picture that he did engage in what would appear to be some violent sexual acts. He has a propensity for violence.
And Aileen was adamant that Mallory was shot in self-defense. What do you think the likelihood of that was, given his past?
What you just asked, that's the million-dollar question. So many times myself, Brian, and many others have had this conversation. What if? What if the jury would have heard all the information involving his past, these violent sexual episodes from the other state? Would that have impacted the jury? Would they have said, yeah, there's a possibility, that what you're saying, Aileen, really did happen, just like you said. So, we'll never know. I know the jury in this particular case, when it all was said and done, wasn't out very long. But then again, the jury never had the benefit of hearing about Richard Mallory's background, his past. Would that have made a difference? I would have to say it's possible.
Aileen is set to take her next victim just 6 months later, in May 1990. Brian Jarvis and David Taylor worked together on the Wuornos case. Brian, do you believe her need to kill escalates after Mallory's death?
So you can see how her psychology changed after she had that hiatus. In fact, if you look at the FBI's definition of a serial killer, back then, what it said was a person that kills 3 or more individuals in separate incidents with a brief cooling off period. Well, after she killed Richard Mallory, what happened? There was a brief cooling off period for 6 months. And then she started to kill quicker, faster, with more anger.
Wow. Yeah, and then it ramps up after that.
Correct. I mean, if you look at Richard Mallory's, his case is different from every other case. He was the first victim. His case is different. He was only shot 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
But what we saw after this was a progression of hate, a progression of anger building up in her. The second victim was shot 6 times. The third victim was shot 9 times, where she emptied out the gun. And not only that, but the cases were now starting to compress in time. While there was a 6-month gap between her first victim and her second, now there's only weeks between the victims.
And David, what Brian says interests me because it does feel as though the Mallory murder is different to all the rest, which we'll find out about later. And then, as you mentioned earlier, he does have a history of sexual violence. So could it be that Aileen was about to kill these other men out of rage for what Mallory allegedly did to her, or what men historically have done to her, like the boys at school, her grandpa, the guy who raped and got her pregnant? Maybe Mallory, layered in with all of these other men of her past, could have been like the trigger that makes her finally explode and kill more people?
It's, I've been asked that same question many times as I've traveled the country and we've, discussed this case. Who in the world was she really killing? Was she killing Richard Mallory over? Was she killing her grandfather? To be very frank, I don't know. Because when you look at Aileen Wuornos, she was so diverse. She was so traveled across the country. She was a survivor. I've got to believe that other people have been raised in maybe parallel environments such as her, but they didn't become serial killers. I really believe that she has made this deliberate, conscious, willful decision to kill. Why she killed each one of these men, that's between her and her maker. I have a gut feeling, but that's just me, and the reason why I kind of guard that, because in police work, homicide detectives, sometimes we get a little focused too narrowly, tunnel vision, and we see things, we're kind of jaded. But why did she kill these guys? I have to believe she was that evil.
Dear Don, they gave me hatred, I gave it back. The master behind the scenes was none other than Lucifer himself. He led the men to do the things they did against me, and in turn, coaxed me to give it back.
Welcome to 1990, Eileen's year of bloodshed. 6 months after Richard Mallory is murdered, she takes the life of victim number 2, 43-year-old construction worker David Spears. On June 1st, his naked body is found on the side of the highway in Citrus County, Florida. He's been shot, not once, but 6 times through the chest. Just a few weeks before this gruesome discovery, retired Marion County Chief of Police Brian Jarvis is called to the scene of an abandoned vehicle. It belongs to David Spears. Brian and his colleague David Taylor are not yet dealing with the Mallory homicide. Another police agency is overseeing that crime scene in Volusia County, a good 2 or so hours away by car. I want to know if he had any early intel that the cases could be linked.
At the time that this happened, we really weren't aware of the Volusia County case as far as any details or specifics or what had happened. All we knew was that David Spears had been reported missing. So we got a call from our patrol division one day, and the sergeant said, "We're out with the vehicle." And when we ran the VIN number, because the license plate was missing, it came back to a missing person. And he said, "What would you like us to do?" And I said, "Secure the scene and we'll be right up there." So we went up with a team of detectives.
Where were you, and did anything stand out to you once you arrived on the scene?
It was on I-75, an interstate in Florida. And the license plate and some of the personal property was tossed off the side over the edge of the interstate, and we had located that. So we found some of those items there. We would later learn that there were other items missing from the truck, such as a statue of a Black Panther about 10 inches tall. And during the investigation, it was found that he had purchased that for his wife. Even though they were separated at the time, they were thinking of getting back together. So he had purchased that for her birthday, and he was on his way to see her on her birthday. And that was one of the items that was taken, was that panther.
Wow. That's sad.
It is.
So if David Spears is driving to see his wife hoping to rekindle their marriage, is it even likely that he was looking for a sex worker, or was he just helping someone he thought was a hitchhiker?
He's on his way after work to meet his wife to celebrate her birthday.
Yeah.
Is he going to stop and pick up a prostitute on the way? Even though the area he was found in was an area used for prostitution, doesn't mean that he picked her up for that. It means that maybe Aileen knew it existed, knew where she could dump the body. You know, there's a lot of speculation there, but I really put a lot of emphasis on the victimology of the victims themselves and what they were doing to look at the possibilities that were there.
Yeah, doesn't make sense. So you have a vehicle and then find a body. What next?
Once they found his body, it was tied back into the truck that we had earlier found. So now there was a connection there, and we'd found that he had been shot 6 times, I believe, with a .22 caliber weapon. But because we had recovered his vehicle, we were notified when the body was found. And then it wasn't too long after that that Charles Carskadden went missing. That was the 3rd victim.
Just days after the discovery of David Spears, the naked body of 40-year-old Charles Carskadden is found 50 miles away in Pasco County along Interstate 75. The truck driver and part-time rodeo bull rider is now so badly decomposed that the medical examiners are unable to obtain fingerprints. Even with 3 dead bodies and vehicles spread across the vast interstates, the police still have no idea that a serial killer is at large.
He was traveling from St. Louis back to Tampa. On the way there, he had run into Aileen, and she had killed Mr. Carskadden and taken his vehicle. A few days later, his vehicle was located again on I-75 in Marion County. His body is recovered. He had been shot 9 times. And what we would learn later on was that the weapon she was using was a 9-shot revolver, which tells us now she emptied out the gun on him.
Emptied the gun. Wow. And of course, you have 3 murders, all linked. But with the different agencies working on each case, the puzzle isn't being put together yet.
No, we don't know that. We have the .22 connection, but unless we had a ballistics match, that really could have been 2 separate guns. And unfortunately, one of the problems we had at the time was that the labs that were being used to test ballistics, there were several of them set up around the state. And each agency had used a different lab, and there was no communication there to tell us that they were connected. So it wasn't until later on that we would find out that those ballistics had a match.
So, with agencies unaware that the cases are linked, Aileen goes on to kill even more men and steal more vehicles. I understand that Tyria, her girlfriend, would drive around with her in the victims' cars.
Yeah, typically what we found was that when the men were killed, their bodies were dumped in isolated areas. It was a miracle that some of them were found. And after she killed them, she would take their vehicles. And her and Tyria would drive around just like it was their car. So there was a very close correlation to the amount of time that they had the vehicles to when the bodies were actually recovered. And again, it was a miracle that some of them were recovered, considering the way they were hidden.
Aileen has now taken the lives of 3 men. And with each murder, we're seeing an escalation in the killings. This is common with serial killers, especially as they become emboldened by not being caught. But as millions of Americans celebrate a day of independence, July 4th, 1990 marks the day when Aileen will start to lose hers. Aileen and her lover Tyria misjudge a bend in the road and crash through barbed wire into a forest near Orange Springs in Florida. But the wrecked 1988 silver Pontiac Sunbird doesn't belong to them or any of the 3 men Aileen's already murdered. It's owned by her 4th victim.
Dear Dawn, after we rolled and the car landed on all 4s, the engine was still running. Although the car was smashed, I took the tag off and told Ty, I don't know how far it will take us, but just as long as we get away from this area where we wrecked would be great, because a house nearby saw what happened.
My name is Rhonda, and I'm a witness in the Aileen Wuornos case. I made the phone call that brought the detectives out to the Orange Springs area that led to her arrest.
It's late afternoon, and Rhonda's sitting on her front porch having a beer. It's peaceful and isolated here, a quiet country road surrounded by forest and the sound of birdsong. But as Rhonda tells me, the tranquility is short-lived.
When they wrecked their car on the corner, we heard them coming. As a matter of fact, they went by one time, went back, found out it was a dead-end road or whatever, or buried their body, whatever they did. And they came back, and we heard the screeching and the sound of the crash. So she kind of crashed through the fence and landed there, about 10 feet into the neighbor's property. It happens a lot there on that curb. And I'm used to jump out and help people. Pull their car out or flip their car back over.
So where you live, this happens quite often. It's not out of the ordinary. So what do you do when you hear the crash?
Well, like I had always done, go out there and see if we can give them all a hand. And most people, they're appreciative of what we do. But these gals, they were very unfriendly. They just wanted to get out of there and get going. They didn't want our help. Joe would have gave them help, something to drink, fixed their cuts and scrapes for them, but they wanted nothing to do with us. My kids walked right up to them and would try to talk to them, see if they needed help, because Aileen had blood dripping through her shirt and down her arm.
Wow, so your kids saw Aileen and Tyria too. Did they say anything to them? What were they like?
My oldest daughter talked to the other girl, Irene or whatever her name was. Asked her, can she help? She smiled at her, said, no, that's okay, honey. And Aileen yelled back at her and said, I told you not to talk to anybody. They didn't want to talk to us.
I read that once it crashed through the fence, they actually tried to run away from the scene. Why did they come back?
They didn't come back until they seen us go over there and look at that car, see how bad it was damaged. And they seen us poking around over there by that car, and they come running back and told us to get away from the car. And they jumped in it. They just wanted to get out, get away, like they was running away or running from something or whatever they were doing. They were not friendly at all.
Not normal behavior when you just had a car crash. So they're trying to drive off, even though the vehicle is totally wrecked, right?
And even in as bad a shape it was in, the radiator was leaking real bad. They managed to get it out, and away they went. They took off and headed towards town. I hear that they only made it up to the gas station before it started overheating, and they had to get water.
But what Rhonda doesn't know is that the woman she's tried to help is a serial killer who has just stolen and wrecked the car of her fourth victim.
Dear Dawn, after the wreck, I said, get in the bushes, man, because I knew some cars were coming. Ty said, what the fuck is the deal? I said, I gotta tell you something. I killed somebody. She said, what? Are you crazy? I said, I killed somebody, man. This car is somebody's I killed.
Aileen and Tyria attempt to drive away, but don't make it far. The damaged tires finally blow out, and the car is abandoned.
The car made it about 3 more miles when the right front tire blew out. We scurried out, not even wiping prints. I was losing a lot of blood from my hand and right arm all cut up, ready to pass out. I said, grab the big red beer cooler, sunglasses, baseball caps, and let's go. The car stayed on the side of the road, smashed to hell.
Retired Officer Brian Jarvis is one of the first on the scene.
It had been called in initially as a motor vehicle accident, and the caller had seen 2 girls leaving the car, and they were on their way to go see the fireworks in Daytona Beach. And what had happened was they saw a sign indicating there was an Indian reservation up on one of our side streets. So they detoured maybe 7 miles. They were upset because now they're going to be late for the fireworks, and Tyria's driving the car. And when she comes out of the area, she misses a turn, goes off the road, strikes a tree. The side of the car gets damaged, and the car stalls. About this time, another vehicle pulls up and sees that they had an accident, and they stop to offer them help. But of course, these girls don't want help from anybody. They want to stay as far away from people as they can.
The driver's seat has been left in the forwardmost position, indicating the person driving is petite. And with the license plate ripped off, the VIN number is all police have to go by. Brian's colleague David Taylor recalls the moment police realized this car crash could be far more sinister.
This wasn't your typical case. You have a car crash, females walking away from the car. The VIN number of that vehicle is ran through the computer. It is reported to belong to a guy that's now missing and believed to be endangered. So who is this guy? Where is he?
He is 65-year-old Peter Sims, retired. He and his wife Ursula devote their time to a Christian outreach missionary program. Much of Peter's day is spent helping those in need and offering them guidance in finding God.
Peter Sims left Jupiter, Florida, and he was on the way to go to New Jersey, but he never made it.
Hopefully, we'll find some new evidence, possibly the body. We're just extending our search about another square mile that we're trying to look into.
There was an individual there that saw two girls leaving this car, and that individual was able to give us a description of who they were. We found his wrecked car in the Ocala National Forest, and this would be really our first link into what was going on. We searched for Peter Sims. We couldn't find his body, and to this day, his body's never been found.
Police believe Peter Sims was simply picking up Aileen to help a woman in need. David and Kathy are Peter Sims' nephew and niece, and they both spoke to the Mind of a Monster documentary team in 2020.
My Uncle Pete was a very kind man. He was one of the kindest men I ever met. He'd do anything for anybody. He told me he liked to pick up hitchhikers. He says, I like to talk to him about the Lord, about God. You have a captive audience, I guess, you know, so. But I said, Uncle Pete, you're still. I said, it's far too dangerous to do that, you know. And he looked at me, he said, Dave, he says, if I get taken out or hurt or anything, he says, at least I'll be doing the Lord's work.
He was the most gentlest soul you'd ever want him. He was a giver. He loved God. He loved the Lord. He had a bunch of Bibles in the back of his truck. He was going to go to the camp meeting after Memorial Day when Aunt Rose called. She says, where's Uncle Pete? I said, what do you mean, where's Uncle Pete? And she says, well, he never showed up.
Peter and his wife Ursula are one of 250 volunteers at this camp meeting run out of Jupiter, Florida by Peter's friend Bill Lowry, the organizer of the Christian ministry. What do you remember about the day Peter went missing? From the beginning, could you tell me about how that day unfolded up until the point when he left the camp?
He was going north, and he was leaving out and said goodbye through the camp. You know, we always did anytime anybody went out, we got a prayer circle and got around him and prayed over him and blessed him and sent him off, you know. And Ursula was staying with us, and he took off.
And it's a big camp. How long was it before people realized that Peter hadn't called to say he had arrived? Because that's a normal thing to do, right?
Oh, yeah, like the second day after, you know, giving him enough time to drive through and call back. You know, back in those days, you didn't have handhelds. You know, we're living at a camp, and usually there were people in the vicinity, the area where we had the big tent and our whole camp set up that would let us use their phones, and we could take phone calls. Whoever our little communication center was, you know, we were looking for a phone call from him and said, no, we haven't heard nothing. We haven't heard nothing.
Ursula was still there. She must have been a terrible mess.
She's a German, you know. The German are very, next to the British, they're probably about as stoic as you can get, you know. So she was like, you know, very strong woman, you know, and believing the best, you know. Maybe somebody's taking him hot. And I'll tell you, we all knew one thing, that if anybody had grabbed Pete they got sermonized, they got preached to, and they got loved because he was just a loving, kind man, and he witnessed to everybody. You know, he was really turned on to the Lord. Ursula was mothering him. You know, she mothered everybody. And Pete kind of fathered everybody. You know, he had like a father's heart, you know. I remember that somebody had come and said Ursula was upset. She hadn't heard from Pete, that he was supposed to go in on several days, I think. And, you know, we all got real serious in praying for Pete. What has happened to Pete?
More than 200 miles away, Brian Jarvis is on duty. Nobody has heard from Peter Sims in days. Brian soon realizes this could be a murder case.
We did everything we could to try and locate his body. We didn't know where it would be. We had not a clue. We didn't know the car had been stolen, driven by other people. We had very, very little information on it. So we searched a huge area of the Ocala National Forest. We searched on foot. We searched on ATVs. We searched on horseback, by helicopter. We searched as hard as we could to try and find him, using canines to try and locate him. We could not find Peter Sims' body, and I don't know how long the search lasted, but it was quite a while.
Wow. And once the car was found, did that give you any clues?
When we bring the car in to process it, it's got that damage on the passenger side. Inside the passenger door was a bloody palm print. When the window shattered, it cut Aileen, and she had gotten some blood on her hand. When she got out of the car, she pushed the door with her palm and left that palm print there.
So not only do you have the palm print, but you have blood too. That must have been useful forensic evidence.
And I believe that was only one of only 2 vehicles we had any evidence out of, forensic evidence that we could use. Now, at that time, we didn't have anything to match it to. There was no palm print database or anything. But we saved it.
Peter's nephew, David Sims.
When you get the news, your stomach just drops out. It's just a terrible feeling. It's just something you don't want to wish on anybody.
But among the heartache, there is hope that the killer can be caught. Because for the first time, there are witnesses like Rhonda and her neighbors. David Taylor.
With Peter Sims, that was a huge turning point in this investigation. And looking back, it was crucial. Beth Smith, she was a forensic artist at the sheriff's office. Thank goodness, had the foresight to involve the services of our forensic artist while it was still fresh in the witness's mind to have composites, drawings generated. They meant everything in this case.
My name is Beth Smith, and I am a fine artist, and I, for a number of years, was a forensic artist for the Marion County Sheriff's Office.
So, Beth, how did you come to be involved in this notorious case?
I was called out by the lead detectives to Orange Springs, Florida, to meet with some witnesses that had encountered a couple people that they had met on the road in the proximity of the car that was involved in the accident. They came across what turned out to be Aileen and her girlfriend, Tyria Moore.
I understand that you were called out on the day the accident happened. Did the witnesses have a good recollection of what the 2 women looked like?
It's very important when you do interview a witness for a composite drawing that you do it as soon as possible. The longer you wait, the more foggy the memory becomes. We got there quickly, and they had such good recall. I was able to come up with two drawings of Tyria and Aileen.
So how did the witnesses describe them?
They described Aileen as being taller than Tyria. She was the shorter, heavier set one. They were adamant about Tyria's face being more round, more fuller cheeks, a more fuller chin area. Aileen, she was the more aggressive out of the two. Tyria was more subdued, more kind of following along with whatever Aileen said. It was clear to them that Aileen was definitely the one taking charge, doing the most talking. And her facial features, she had thinner lips and bad teeth. Aileen had longer dirty blonde hair, and Tyria had more brownish hair that was tucked up under a ball cap that she had pulled down quite a bit toward her face.
And as a woman, what was the realization like that you could be sketching at least one female serial killer?
This was the first time that I had ever drawn women that were possibly suspects in any kind of major crimes. All of my composite drawings up to that point were all male that were involved in any kind of major crimes or violent crimes. So yeah, it was very unusual and a big wow factor.
This is the aha moment. Police now realize they may be hunting down a female serial killer. It's early morning, July 30th, 1990, less than a month after Peter Sims vanishes. Troy Burris is married and working for a sausage company. He leaves the factory as normal to make deliveries, but the 50-year-old never returns. His manager calls businesses he was meant to visit, and Troy's wife reports him missing. But at 4 a.m. the following morning, police find his truck on State Road 19, 20 miles east of Ocala. It's unlocked and the keys are missing. So is a body. Just days later, Brian Jarvis gets the dreaded call.
The first body that I came into contact with was Troy Burris. I can remember getting a call and that the body had been found out in the Ocala National Forest. And as I'm driving out there, it was on a Saturday or Sunday. I wasn't working at the time, but I was on call. And I can remember driving out there saying, I hope I can find the location. I mean, it was so obscure, so out of the way. And I'm driving, and it seemed like hours, but it really was probably only 45 minutes.
But it felt like your whole life.
It did, because you're driving through miles and miles of nothing but trees. And when I got to the area, there were a couple of patrol cars that were sitting out by the road, so I knew where it was, and I was able to go in there and find Troy Burris's body.
How was that?
It was uniquely odd because it was hidden so well. The area that his body was in was off what we call a fire lane. And in the forest, we have fire lanes that run through the forest to allow fire apparatus to enter if there's a huge forest fire. I'm going to guess that this fire lane hadn't been used in 2 years, but his body was down there. And there were a couple of people that came up from the Space Coast, the Merritt Island area of Florida, and they wanted to go to Lake George in the Marion County area, but it was so crowded, they said, well, let's just find a place we can have our little picnic. They drove about, maybe 3 miles away from Lake George, and they see this fire lane. They said, it looks kind of quiet. They drove in about a half mile. They set up their picnic, and they noticed something off into the weeds, something that wasn't green. And they go over and look, and it was blue jeans. And there was a badly decomposing body with these blue jeans. And that was how we found Troy Burris.
How scary for the picnickers.
It was. And in each instance, it wasn't us finding the bodies, it was civilians finding the bodies. And even with Richard Mallory, the first victim, he was in an area where a lot of people dumped illegal scrap. It was kind of like an illegal dumping ground. And a couple people went up there with their metal detectors trying to find some copper or metal they can sell. And they see this hand sticking out from under this red carpet. What's that going to do to you? What are you thinking there? So, it was civilians that were finding the bodies and reporting it to us. And some of these bodies never should have been found. They were that well hidden.
It makes you wonder if there were more.
Yeah.
Troy Burris has been shot with a .22 caliber pistol, this time through the back and chest. The heat and humidity has hastened decomposition. It takes his wife to identify him. by his wedding ring. As police go through unsolved homicide bulletins sent out by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, they notice similarities between this kill and that of David Spears. Both have that .22 caliber connection. Lead investigators on the cases meet to compare notes and noticed even more consistencies. Vehicles are abandoned and the driver's seat pulled into the forwardmost position. And witnesses have seen 2 women flee from Peter Simms' stolen car. Could this actually be the work of a female serial killer?
She killed 7 men in cold blood.
She did not kill in self-defense, but instead was motivated by hatred of men.
There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything. Could I kill again? I have hate crawling through my system.
7 men murdered, only 6 bodies found. From 1989 to 1990, these men fell victim to sex worker Aileen Wuornos as she hitchhiked along Florida's highways. Some were just giving a woman in need a ride. Others parted money for sex. But they all paid the price, as picking her up cost them their lives. Was Aileen's murder spree fueled by rage and anger after decades of abuse at the hands of men? What's the real story of this rock-loving biker chick dubbed the Damsel of Death? Over the course of 6 episodes, we speak with detectives, witnesses, and experts to delve into the case of Aileen Wuornos, tracking her notoriety as America's first female serial killer, and questioning if she, too, was a victim. We will also deep dive inside the mind of a monster, hearing Aileen's innermost thoughts and feelings from letters she sent from death row to her best friend, Dawn. I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Season 5 of Mind of a Monster, Aileen Wuornos, Episode 4, Killer Queen. To look at Aileen Wuornos, she's not your stereotypical serial killer. For starters, she's a woman. She's small and petite with bouncing, silky blonde hair. Her best friend Dawn remembers Aileen always wanted to look presentable, brushing her hair and wearing makeup. But despite her outward appearance, Aileen is now committed to the kill. She has brutally shot and murdered 5 men, one victim having the gun emptied on him, with 9 bullets fired through his chest. And on September 11, 1990, she takes the life of victim number 6. The body is found in Marion Oaks, Marion County. David Taylor was a lead detective overseeing this homicide.
I had been informed that 2 young lads riding bicycles in an undeveloped subdivision had actually come across a body. When they found this body, they bicycled home as quick as they could. They notified their parents what they had discovered, and it was the parents of these 2 children that had notified law enforcement by calling 911.
Did you realize it was a homicide pretty much instantly?
The general rule is all suspicious deaths are treated as homicide until we can, disprove or prove one theory. And, a lot of work goes in early on because in this case, we were already behind the clock. The clock was already ticking.
You saw the body. Can you describe that moment?
I remember when I arrived at the Charles Humphreys crime scene, you had an overwhelming police presence. You had a lot of yellow crime scene tape up around the immediate crime scene. And, darkness was setting in. When I approached the remains, I could see that he was that of a white male, middle-aged, well-dressed in professional type attire. He looked well-dressed, but what did I really notice? I could tell that it was apparent had been shot multiple times.
So he was fully clothed, and some of the other victims were found naked, and this could indicate he wasn't paying for sex.
One of the things that I quickly noticed was that his belt was not undone, his zipper was not undone. There was nothing that would indicate any type of redress or a state of redress. His shirt was not pulled out. So what else really stuck out in my mind? Well, there wasn't any vehicle around. So here you have this guy, we're pretty sure he didn't walk there, but how did he get there? And he was found at the end of a cul-de-sac by a culvert, and he was laying basically on his right side, and his legs bent upward at the knee.
We know Aileen's shootings seemed to escalate in severity. 4 bullets, then 6, 9. Did this seem like a particularly brutal attack?
Anytime you're shot, that's pretty brutal. This guy was shot, multiple times. And there was one wound that, almost looked like he was in a defensive type position that was, on near his wrist. Like his hands were up, almost like in front of his face, like, don't shoot, or he's defending himself.
Which indicates this guy isn't being shot in self-defense. He's defending himself.
We found what appeared to be that of some type of an impact injury on the right side, his abdomen. And it was circular, and it resembled that of a gun barrel. So, that was a very significant find. My initial gut instinct was that he was most likely a victim of robbery. The reason why I say that is because the pants pockets were turned inside out. When you have a situation like that, what is your game plan? You have to work feverishly to identify your person.
David and his team estimate the victim's age, height, and weight. He's been shot with a .22 caliber gun. But with limited information and no ID, they issue an alert to surrounding counties that a body has been found. The bulletin is seen by police in nearby Sumter County, Florida.
They responded and said the day prior that they had taken a missing persons report.
Dear Dawn, a .22 was for shooting birds. One shot would never do a thing, and the assailant would still be fighting with you, even after 5 shots like Humphrey's. The bullets didn't even faze him until the wounds started to take an effect.
Investigators from Sumter County race to the crime scene, and within just a few hours, a positive ID is made. The victim is 56-year-old Charles Humphreys. He's been married for 35 years and has grown children. Humphreys has just retired from the police in Florida as a child abuse investigator. He went missing after his last day on the job.
Once we got the name, we worked literally all night long into the early morning hours the next day, running down these travels. Like I said, once we had the name, we had his work schedule, we knew who the people were that he was to make contact with in his job that day. So a lot of doors were knocked on at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning to dig up what we could. He had worked with the police chief, actually, with the Sylacauga, Alabama Police Department. And then prior to that, he had a very distinguished military career.
And did it have a bigger impact on you, given he was a fellow officer?
But it was in the back of your mind that he was basically a fellow officer. I'm not going to say it didn't make us work harder, but it did, just because of what he represented. He was working for the state as a child abuse investigator. And it was that job that took his life.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. How much of an impact did this case have on your personal life? Or just you as a person?
I think about any homicide investigator will tell you that they work in what we call a busy house, where you have your fair share of violent crime. It is hard on your personal life. It is hard on your social life. When you look at where we are today with science, technology, DNA, with what the new guys have compared with what we had back in the late 80s, we burn a lot of the midnight oil. I can tell you from personal experience, there were quite a few cases where we didn't go home. I can tell you there were cases where for 2 or 3 days at a time, you don't see your wife, you don't see your children, because you're out running down leads. So, this case did take a toll because of the nature of the case.
And you had to support the family of Charles Humphreys when they got that awful news.
I did meet his wife. I did stay in contact with the Humphreys family for quite some time after the homicide. And I remember on multiple occasions when his widow, Shirley Humphreys, would actually come to Ocala. She would even stop in our office and ask for me. And I would always go up to the lobby and meet with her and talk with her. They were a super family. And, and it's tough to talk about this because of what happened and knowing that I was right on the heels of their anniversary. And it's just a good family. And knowing his background, and she even gifted me, this is years after the fact, one of the textbooks that he had when he was going through a college program dealing with criminal justice that had some personal notations in it. And why she decided to gift that, memento to me, I don't know. But I do feel with hindsight, there was a connection that I had with that family.
As we've just heard, Charles Humphreys worked in law enforcement, was married, and was fully dressed when his body was found. Also, some of his bullet wounds suggest he had been defending himself. Aileen is an unusual serial killer because throughout her life she has shown signs of giving love, having empathy, and really caring for people such as Tyria, her brother, and her grandma. We heard in the previous episode how Aileen maintained that Mallory attacked her. But if victims such as Charles Humphreys did not use her for sex or abuse her, then why shoot them dead? I want to go to the thoughts of childhood trauma expert Dr. Tasha Jackson. Aileen maintained until the day she died that Richard Mallory either raped her or tried to rape her. And then some of the other victims, like Peter Sims, he was just a missionary man. He was literally just trying to help a woman he saw in need. I don't think it's this direct, but there's this idea that it could be that Mallory raped her, and that set her on this trajectory. It triggered her to kill 6 more men, even if they weren't threats. Do you have an opinion about that?
So, there's part of me that wants to believe everybody. So let's just go down that road first. Makes sense that she got raped, and that set her off as a self-defense, and that makes sense of the fight or flight, and she went into a fight mode. What I read from her, what I thought was interesting, was almost like once she killed again, she somehow rationalized that once I've crossed this barrier, then I've crossed it and there's no going back. And so we have a way of all of us rationalize our behavior to being okay. And it crossed a threshold for her. Now, I think it's interesting. We have real fear and we have perceived fear. And was there something that she still got triggered into perceived threat that maybe wasn't a threat, but it was that same feeling?
So if there was a victim who was no threat at all, they could have done anything, something as simple as how they hold the wheel or which cassette they played. Something innocent could have made her feel that perceived fear and threat.
Maybe I can use an example of sometimes when people are trying to get sober, you don't play the same music because it can bring up everything you did when you were high, right? And so here it is, she's back in a situation where she's doing sex work, and what maybe would have triggered back to that experience of being raped in that? I don't know. I'll take again, trusting the story here that he wasn't a threat, but what did she pick up on physiologically that it was like programmed, put into her body, like that was there, that it was that same sort of feeling for her? Real and perceived is a real interesting thing part about like abandonment or fear. We have to look at what is perceived from that individual, their story.
Back in Marion County, police are tracing Charles Humphreys' last steps. They visit every possible place he could have stopped along the I-75 highway. And wherever they stop, they ask store clerks if they recognize the 2 female suspects in the composite sketch. Former Marion County Chief of Police Brian Jarvis tells me no stone was left unturned.
He had last been seen near a truck stop on I-75. We went in and showed the composites to the clerk at the truck stop, and she thought that 2 girls that looked like that had been in there about the same time that he had been missing from the area. So now we felt we had a really good link to it. So it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle, and you're putting the pieces together.
And they're exciting pieces because it's like, okay, A, it looks like it's a serial situation, and B, it looks like it could be a woman. Like that's unusual.
Yes. She said they were acting kind of giddy. She felt pretty sure that they were in there between 4 and 4:30 in the afternoon, which would have been about the same time that Mr. Humphreys had stopped there.
So not only do police have a lead, but the brunette suspect, Tyria, has now been seen in the truck stop store with Aileen when Humphreys went missing. She was also seen fleeing the car of Peter Sims. Could Tyria have been involved? Brian Jarvis.
As far as any involvement Tyria had, we know that she was driving Peter Sims' car when it crashed. We believed that she had been at the convenience store because of the ID that the clerk had made when Mr. Humphreys was taken.
Makes sense. You mentioned earlier about the stolen cars, how the driver's seats were in the forward position, suggesting a smaller person was driving. But we also know that some of these bodies were dragged deep into the woods. So do you think she was acting alone? Because Tyria always denied direct involvement and was never charged with anything.
Based on the evidence that we found, at least on some of the homicides, it would indicate that Aileen was acting alone. But as I said, with Peter Sims, Tyria was driving his car. Now, that doesn't mean she was involved in his death, because that had been a month earlier.
Right.
But she was in his vehicle. With Mr. Humphreys, the clerk believed that there were 2 women in there. So there's some speculation there.
Shortly after Charles Humphrey's death, Aileen strikes again, shooting her 7th victim, Walter Antonio, to death. With 7 men now savagely killed in less than a year, it's a race against time for police to stop the suspect from killing again, and again, and again. The composite sketch is released to the media. Overnight, it makes front-page headlines.
Walter Antonio shooter strikes again. 7 victims ultimately. When will this end?
Rhonda is the witness who saw Aileen and Tyria wreck the car of victim Peter Sims. Rhonda tells me about the moment she realizes she's come face to face with a killer.
I had no idea who they were until I seen their picture or sketch on the evening news, and watched that story about the serial killer, and that they were looking for these people. And I'm like, I kind of put blonde and one's brunette. Well, those girls that wrecked here yesterday, that could have been them.
You must have been shocked. What did you do?
And I called the sheriff's department, and I told them what happened. And they're like, oh, yeah, I guess they must have had a lot of calls. But they sent a detective out, and he goes, well, where did they wreck? And I pointed over there across the road. I said, well, that's where the car landed. And he's like, he didn't believe me.
Oh.
I said, I'll tell you how you know if it's the right car or not. She went through a barbed wire fence. If that's the same car that you're looking for, it will have those scratches from a barbed wire fence all up and down the hood and the roof of the car. He was gone for about a minute. The next thing I know, here comes the cops. There must have been 20 squad cars out there and helicopters overhead, and Channel 20 News and Channel 2 News out there, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And the rest is history, I guess.
Men all over Florida are afraid to offer rides to women hitchhiking, and even those picking up sex workers feel nervous. For Brian Jarvis, the media coverage is both a help and a hindrance.
The public was enamored by this. The twist that was put on it by the media. that she was a prostitute and that all these men were Johns added to that fuel. And we would later see that that wasn't the case. I think what the media was trying to portray was that all these guys were Johns. They were all picking her up for sex, and I don't buy into that because of what we found. And I think with each and every case, we can see where the victim had stopped for food or fuel or something to drink maybe, and at some point run into Aileen. When I first started in law enforcement, I had a very small view of what was going on. Just a very limited view of what was going on. And never in my life did I think I'd be involved in a case like this. Never in my life did I think I'd be working on a case involving a serial killer.
She's gotten away with it so far, but the hunt is now on for the women in the composite drawing. And thanks to a discovery in a local pawn shop, the net is closing in. Two women drawn in the composite sketch are still on the loose, and police are stepping up the search. They have a hunch. With Florida being a transient state, pawn shops can be seen on nearly every corner. Detective David Taylor already knows items have been stolen from victims, with some objects found dumped, thrown from vehicles. But could this serial killer be selling the belongings too? In December 1990, they discover a radar detector and camera in a pawn shop. The original owner? Victim number 1, Richard Mallory.
If someone were to pawn an item in one of the pawn shops throughout the state of Florida, they had to leave behind an index print on that pawn ticket. We had a radar detector, a camera that had been pawned, and on that pawn ticket, there was an index print. There was no match in the AFA system. A decision was made to actually hand check these fingerprints. And Jenny Ahern, back in the day, was a fingerprint specialist with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement at their crime lab. She began this mountain task of actually trying to find this fingerprint, literally looking for the needle in the haystack.
Police have a solid piece of forensic evidence. A bloodied palm print from inside of Peter Sims' wrecked car. If the fingerprint left at the pawn shop can be matched to this, it will reveal the name of the killer. It's December 21st, 1990, and at the request of police, fingerprint expert Jenny Ahern has just arrived in Volusia County. She has a mammoth task ahead. Jenny's job is to manually flick through thousands of files with images of fingerprints and try to match them to the fingerprint from the crime scene with just her own eyes. Jenny described this painstaking process when she spoke to the Mind of a Monster team in 2020.
Almost an unbelievable task that you will never be able to do because it's the number of cards that we were going to be facing and having to look at would be like trying to win the lottery. And I'm talking a huge lottery. And when we do that, do we really think we're going to ever win? No. But it was something that we thought it was important enough that we had to do this. Whether or not we identified it or not, we had to at least try.
Eventually, she hits the jackpot.
I came across a card, and it was one of those feelings like, this cannot be happening. This is impossible. I think I just won megabucks. And took the print like this, and then took my glass, and it was one of those feelings where you don't feel like you can even breathe because this cannot be happening. So after that, because we believe in verification, and because of the importance of this, I had both of my coworkers look at that print as well. And we all agreed that it was an identification, and we had a name of Aileen Wuornos on that fingerprint card. We flipped it over, and on the back it said that it was a white female, about the same height that they had said, and that there was, the person had been arrested for a weapons charge, and I believe it was a .22, which was the same type of weapon that she had been using. It was almost breathtaking, but so exhilarating. It was really unbelievable, because we really thought Christmas was not going to happen, that we were going to be here forever, and it was just going to be an unending task. And for us to finish in 15 minutes was just crazy.
The police finally know who their killer is. Aileen Wuornos.
When a fingerprint match was eventually made, the bloody palm print was eventually matched to the known prints of Aileen Wuornos from a prior arrest. And it was at that point we knew we could put Aileen Wuornos inside Peter Sims' vehicle.
The police are now hunting Aileen. They have prints, but also one huge problem. There are no grounds to charge for a homicide case. Peter Sims' body has not been found, and they can't prove Aileen has killed simply because her fingerprint is found inside a stolen vehicle. The only way for them to prove she has murdered is with a confession. And to do that, they need a specialist to go undercover. I speak to Detective Taylor about Mike Joyner's role. Tell me who Mike Joyner is and why he was needed.
Mike Joyner is probably one of the best undercover police officers I've met in my career, and I've met quite a few. Mike was a detective with the Citrus County Sheriff's Office. His specialty was undercover operations, undercover investigations. When information came to us that we focused our efforts in Volusia County in the area of Port Orange, he played a critical role. His job was to scour the bars and find a person who looked like the person in this composite.
Mike was bouncing covertly from bar to bar for days before finally striking gold on January 8, 1991. The location? The Last Resort Bar in Port Orange, Eileen's favorite drinking hole. Sadly, Mike has passed away, but he spoke on the Mind of a Monster documentary about the moment he spotted Aileen.
When I first walked in the other bar, I saw her. In that picture right there, you can't tell unless you look at it real close, but she had a scar over her left eye, and it was pretty noticeable. And when I walked in, that's the first thing I saw was her, and that scar over her, and I knew that was her. I had another guy with me, and I told him, Dick, leave. Don't be with me, don't associate yourself with me, leave. Go to a telephone somewhere, call the command post and tell them I got my eyeballs on her and I'm not leaving until it's time to take her down. And that's exactly how I first met her. And my first thought was, we got her. We got her in our sight. I'm not gonna let her out of my sight. That means she's not gonna kill no more people, but I'm not gonna let her get away. I went and bellied up to the bar to her and started talking to her. And I asked her if she wanted a beer, and she said, certainly. And I bought her a beer, and she said, can you buy me some cigarettes? Well, I had probably $500 in my pocket, so I pulled it all out and paid it for her. She seen all that money. And honestly, it wasn't my talent, it wasn't what I done, it's that Aileen seen that money, and she was gonna stay close to me, because I had all that money in my pocket.
Mike fabricates a story. He tells Aileen he came in from Georgia to kill two people who ripped him off over 70 kilos of coke, and the pair start to drink together. With police staking out nearby, the undercover team call in to say Aileen is inside the bar. Game on. The Last Resort Biker Bar has now become the stage for one of the most important undercover operations of Mike Joyner's career. I want to know what it was like for Detective Taylor and the team waiting outside, knowing Mike was sitting with a serial killer.
We have a vehicle across the street set up with audio-visual equipment to record video. Mike was wired for sound, so we could capture everything possible. It's all about gathering evidence.
Yeah. Did he describe to you the atmosphere inside there? I mean, you guys are so close. Was he nervous, excited? How were you guys all feeling?
First of all, it's safety. We want everyone to go home at the end of their shift, to be with their family. But it's also high risk. Why is it high risk? Well, you're looking at a possible female that's suspected of killing all these guys. So, where's the gun? What type of other weapons does she have on herself? So, it really is. It's a very stressful situation.
Mike Joyner recounts a pivotal and intense moment in the undercover investigation.
She had a bag and a pocketbook, and that was one of the things I wasn't going to let get out of my sight, because I honestly thought she had the murder weapon in the bag or it wasn't a suitcase, it was like a tote case. And I honestly thought she had the gun in there. And I wasn't going to let those two, the gun the bag and the suitcase, I wasn't going to let them go. I wasn't going to let her go. I mean, she wasn't leaving. She was telling me to bring all my money and take her out, and she's going to show me a good time. When she told me that, I knew I was the next victim, and that's when I put the wire on.
The audio you're about to hear is from undercover surveillance footage being recorded by police officers outside the bar, communicating with Mike Joyner, who is inside with Aileen.
We gotta do something now. You think this is cross street? Maybe she'll come out to show us directions. Terry, tell them we can get her outside the bar, and then go back in and get her stuff. Dick and I both can identify her pocketbook and her suitcase as being her stuff. If we don't, I don't know what time she's gonna leave that bar. But we need to get her out there now, because they're gonna have a big fucking party here tonight.
For Mike, it must have been a terrifying moment. He heads to the bathroom and updates the team, anxiously staking out. I want to know from Detective Taylor what happened next.
Video operations were underway. Audio recordings were underway. So many decisions have to be made. You're working with prosecutors. You're working with senior law enforcement staff. How are we going to play this card that we've been dealt? How are we going to take her into custody? And you have all these, you're looking at the safety of the people, the safety of the patrons, the safety of the people that are outside driving by this 4-lane highway, going right down Port Orange. But eventually, a decision was made to get her to come outside.
Mike persuades Aileen to leave with him by suggesting they go to a motel. But before leaving, Aileen makes a call from inside the bar to check that a room has been booked.
Did he put it in a girl's name? What? I can't stand this.
Hey, ma'am, I got the room, okay? Okay, this lady's gonna come stay in it because I've got to leave, all right? Okay, she's gonna come stay in. I give her the key. I've already paid you for the room. I give you a $5 deposit for the key. Okay, she's gonna stay in room number 11, all right?
As soon as they exit, the police swoop in on them. To avoid blowing Mike's cover, they pretend Mike's involved and handcuff him, while arresting Aileen on an outstanding warrant. The moment was recorded by police.
What's over here, man? What's your name, pal? Hey. My name's Jones, man. What's wrong? My name is Investigator Hordable with the Sheriff's Office, Volusia County Warrants Division. Yeah, let's see some identification. I ain't got nothing, man. Let me see some identification. I ain't got no identification. Let me see some identification. I ain't got no fucking identification, man. I ain't got none. I ain't got no fucking thing, man. I ain't got none.
What the hell is going on here?
Aileen is in the back of the police car with Mike, who makes a last-ditch attempt to get her to confess.
What's going on, girl?
I don't know. I don't know what the hell's going on.
What kind of fucking trouble you in?
I don't know what's going on. So what the hell? You want to tell me?
You tell me.
Tell me.
We got in the back seat. I kind of went off on her a little bit. We asked her what the F are you doing to me? I ain't done nothing. And she said, they think I killed a man. I said, well, you stupid bitch, did you? And then she did go on. She had a clip that she kept a lot of keys on her belt. After she was arrested, they took those keys and tracked them back to a storage shed. When they tracked that key back to that storage shed and got a search warrant, every man she killed, she kept a souvenir of.
Dear Dawn, the only trial I wish to see is in the higher courts of heaven, where there is no injustice but pure righteousness. He knew what these men have done to me since I left home. He knows why I went off, pushed overboard by their wicked ways.
Aileen is finally caught and taken into custody. Her serial killing spree has ended, but her journey is far from over.
She killed 7 men in cold blood.
She did not kill in self-defense, but instead was motivated by hatred of men.
There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system.
7 men murdered, only 6 bodies found. From 1989 to 1990, these men fell victim to sex worker Aileen Wuornos as she hitchhiked along Florida's highways. Some were just giving a woman in need a ride. Others parted money for sex. But they all paid the price, as picking her up cost them their lives. Was Aileen's murder spree fueled by rage and anger after decades of abuse at the hands of men? What's the real story of this rock-loving biker chick dubbed the Damsel of Death? Over the course of 6 episodes, we speak with detectives, witnesses, and experts to delve into the case of Aileen Wuornos, tracking her notoriety as America's first female serial killer, and question if she too was a victim. We will also deep dive inside the mind of a monster, hearing Aileen's innermost thoughts and feelings from letters she sent from death row to her best friend, Dawn. I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Season 5 of Mind of a Monster, Aileen Wuornos. Episode 5, Stab Me in the Back. It's January 9th, 1991, and Aileen is in custody at Florida's Volusia County Jail. But investigators are faced with a conundrum. Aileen's fingerprints may match the bloodied palm print from the victim's car, and there is evidence she pawned another victim's possessions, but none of this is sufficient evidence to charge her with murder. To get Aileen off the streets, police have arrested her on an outstanding warrant from 1986 for weapons possession. Aileen has no idea of the huge investigation underway to bring her to justice for the multiple murders she has committed. David Demore worked as the prosecutor for the Aileen Wuornos trial.
At the time Aileen was arrested, we are without physical evidence to connect her to the Mallory homicide or the Carskadden homicide or the Humphreys homicide or any of the homicides. Until she starts making statements about what she did, we have nothing.
So, without specific evidence of murder, the prosecution needs a confession from Aileen, and they know the best person for the job. Tyria Moore, Aileen's girlfriend. Police tracked down Tyria in Pennsylvania the day after Aileen's arrest. She's scared and insists she has nothing to do with the murders. But knowing Aileen will do anything for her lover, police asked Tyria to help by covertly calling Aileen, who's in custody, to see if she will confess. With undercover officer Mike Joyner, the team brings Tyria back to Florida. Marion County's retired chief of police, Brian Jarvis, tells me more.
When we located Tyria, the prosecution had her set up in a motel room in Daytona Beach. And they arranged to have Aileen call her by having Tyria send a letter to the jail with the phone number. They recorded 13 phone calls. She was so dedicated and so much in love with Tyria, she would do anything to defend her. So that would probably fall into one of the calculations that was made when she agreed to cooperate with the prosecution.
Tyria soon receives a call. Operation Confession is underway.
Hello? Hi. Yes. Yes.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey, I had to call you early because I didn't know if you were going to miss anything or what.
I don't... What the hell's going on, Lee? They've called. They've been up to my parents again. They've got my sister now asking her questions. I don't know what the hell's going on.
Huh. What are they asking your sister questions for?
I don't know. Lee, they're coming after me. I know they are.
No, they're not. They're innocent.
They've got to. Why are they asking so many questions then?
Honey, listen. Do what you gotta do, okay?
I'm gonna have to because I'm like gonna go to jail for something that you did. This isn't fair. My family is a nervous wreck up there. My mom has been calling me all the time. She doesn't know what the hell's going on.
Okay.
The phone Tyria is using to speak with Aileen is bugged with a recording device so that police can listen in and possibly use it as evidence. Undercover officer Mike Joyner spoke about this next stage of the operation in the Mind of a Monster documentary.
She was very scared, intimidated by all the law enforcement, but not pressured. And we made sure to tell her, you're not pressured to do anything. I don't think she was distraught because Aileen was caught. I think she was distraught because she had involved herself with somebody like this, and it was coming back to haunt her family too. I'm sitting there talking to her, saying, you need to ask for this, we need to go here, we need to go there. I knew Aileen and how she felt about Tyree, and I knew what Tyree needed to do to push Eileen's button, because she felt like much in love with her. I sit beside her on the bed with a pad, and when I wanted her to ask her a question, I'd write it down. Ask her this, ask her this. If she'd answer, and then they'd hang up, and we'd go over it all again. They call back, we do the same thing. And just kept asking, kept writing down questions that I knew would set Aileen off.
It's a delicate process that takes days of repeated phone calls. If Tyria pushes too much, Aileen could get suspicious. But if she doesn't ask the right questions, Aileen won't confess.
What?
I'm not going to let you go to jail.
You evidently don't love me anymore. You don't trust me or anything. I mean, you're going to let me get in trouble for something that I didn't do?
I said I'm not. Listen, quit crying, please.
I can't help it. I'm scared shitless.
I know.
And then, Aileen says the words they've all been waiting for.
Tyra, listen.
What?
I'm not going to let you go to jail or anything. Listen, if I have to confess, I will.
Okay. Yes. Why now did you do this? Why did you do this?
Listen, Ty.
Wait.
I promise never to confess you.
Yes.
I love you. If I have to confess everything just to keep you from getting in trouble, I will.
Okay.
Don't worry, okay?
Okay.
I love you.
No. Don't do it now. Get it over with.
Right this very moment?
Yes. Get it over with.
All right. Okay?
Okay.
You can call me back later.
All right.
All right. Okay, bye.
Brian, we've just heard Aileen say to Ty, "If I have to confess everything to keep you from getting into trouble, I will." That moment must have been filled with conflicting emotions. I mean, here you have her saying she will confess, but it's to protect the woman she loves most. What did you make of that?
I thought it was a very emotional call on both ends. And Aileen viewed Tyria as her soulmate. She thought they'd be together forever. Tyria, I think, did everything she could to protect herself. But she felt she had to do that, and it was, I guess you could say, self-preservation.
But going back really quickly to the taped call in which Aileen says to Tyria, "If I have to confess, I will." It's kind of interesting how she worded that, don't you think?
It is, and I always thought that because the way I view it is she would do anything to protect Tyria. So why is she protecting her? Tyria was working with the prosecution at the time of the phone calls. But she had no idea that they weren't going to prosecute her, but she was going to do her best. And ultimately, as you heard at the end of that last phone call, Tyria said, "Do it now." And she said, okay. And then she contacted a correction officer then and said she wanted to talk to police.
Dear Dawn, crying my eyes out and say, I need to talk to someone working on the recent murders around Florida.
On January 16th, Aileen tells corrections officers that she wants to confess to the murders. This is recorded archive audio from the interview room in Volusia County Jail.
How you doing? Well, I came here to confess to murder. Okay.
In that audio, Aileen states, "I came here to confess to murder." But in a letter to her best friend, Dawn Bodkins, Aileen says she wasn't happy about the circumstances of her interview, describing her mental state and hallucinations.
Dear Dawn, they used extortion to make me melt over concern for Tyria and confess. And personally, I wasn't ready to. At least not until I dried out from my alcoholism. I was about to confess, when in my heart, I wasn't ready. I was still mentally incompetent and incoherent too, with the shakes. I at one time thought I saw a group of worms swimming around in a corner, but didn't react to it because it only lasted a second.
I want to talk to retired Marion County Detective David Taylor to see what he made of these startling claims.
Depending on what mood she was in that day, what was playing in her mind is what came out of her mouth. What I do know is the evidence that we have and it was discovered at the crime scenes, what we learned from the victims, what we learned from the autopsy, and with her account of how some of these crimes unfolded, her stories would change from time to time, which I think is most likely indicative of some of her psychological turmoil or her personality disorders. So, and I've dealt with people in the past where, they've been charged with some serious crimes, and one day they have a different perception as to how things occurred. It's their perception. And I think Aileen is no different. She knew she'd killed 7 guys.
While I do agree with David Taylor that Aileen probably did have changing perceptions of events as they unfolded, I do also believe that this is a woman who is very much struggling with deteriorating mental health. I speak with Dr. Jethro Toomer, who psychologically evaluated Aileen on multiple occasions while she was in custody. What did you make of Aileen's hallucinations, specifically her recollection of seeing a group of worms swimming around during her confession?
I think it was characteristic of, I believe that she moved in and out of various levels of severity in terms of the symptomatology manifested. I believe that at times she may have hallucinated. But you remember I believe it was when she was on death row, right before they executed her. She said something about, I'm going to join the mothership. And so at various points in time, she has engaged in, she has alluded to behavior that suggests that she is, she's not very reality oriented. She's out of touch with reality.
It's a theme that continues. Aileen suffers more hallucinations and later will suspect she is a victim of a conspiracy. But when so many of her thoughts are lucid and eloquent, she must have found it hard to separate reality from fantasy. I speak to trauma expert Dr. Tasha Jackson about this. Tasha, it kind of makes sense that she would be having these hallucinations, doesn't it? I mean, given her childhood trauma and her family history of schizophrenia.
Yes, it does. And it's interesting that she has multiple of them, which makes me think the severity of it. But it makes me wonder then, what is the diagnosis of it being, depression with psychotic features, or bipolar with psychotic features, or schizophrenia, which if she has a history of schizophrenia in her family. And then it makes me think, okay, usually with hallucinations, there can be delusions. So what delusional thoughts is she having? And she acknowledges that she knows she's not well. And at the same time, my heart goes out to her of like, she's been pressed so much environmentally. Was this her brain just trying to I need a break from reality and just know that I'm not there? When somebody is having a hallucination like that, they are seeing senses that we are not actually seeing.
Given we know all of this about Aileen, can we honestly say if she was ever mentally competent to stand trial? Either way, one thing's for sure. She is still adamant about protecting her girlfriend Tyria, and when interviewed, stresses only she is responsible. As the hours go by, Aileen is given a hot drink and a cigarette. She has a map and shows police the areas she committed her crimes. But what's also apparent from letters to Dawn is that Aileen tries to plead self-defense in the Richard Mallory case. Aileen claims that a lot of what she says in custody is ignored.
Dear Dawn, they'd cut me off if at times I'd start rolling. The guy in the sausage truck was gonna kill you? Now me. Oh yeah, he... Cut off. See how they jumped any statements about self-defense?
Aileen is charged with the murder of Richard Mallory, victim number 1, and the only murder in Volusia County. It is this case that will be tried first, making national headlines. It is November 1991. Aileen Wuornos is behind bars awaiting trial for the murder of Richard Mallory, having also confessed to the murders of 6 other men. Aileen, scarred by abuse, rape, and neglect in her childhood, has once again been let down by someone she thought she could fully love and trust, Tyria. But good friend Dawn is always close by. What was it like when you finally got to visit Aileen?
Well, I was so damn happy it wasn't funny, but I was paranoid at the same time because I had to take 2 planes to get there and I was scared to death. But it was the safest place she ever was. She had a nice warm bed, TV, loved her music, and she loved her writing.
It was a special moment for you both.
Yeah, because she just put a big grin on her face and she said, "Oh my God, Dawn, you look the same. She got your hair kind of short, though." And I'm like, "No, you look the same as you did, that's for sure." Because she had such white, beautiful blonde hair. And she had her brush in her hand because she carried her brush with her all the time. She'd stop a conversation just to brush her hair. She'd say, "Wait a minute." And she would lean over her chair, brush her hair down, flick it back.
And what did Aileen say to you before she went to trial?
She would say, I can't believe they're doing this to me. I'm a woman that was raped, and then she'd go on about some of the rapes and stuff like that. But I would go off to something else, like, come on, let's talk about other things you did in your life and you're going to do in your life. I didn't come here to sit and hear the stories on these guys. Write them down. Which she did.
On January 14th, 1992, Aileen Wuornos appears in court for the murder of Richard Mallory. Overnight, she becomes notorious. Her face is in every newspaper and on every news channel, dubbed America's first female serial killer. As she has been ignored almost all of her life, I want to hear how Dawn thought Aileen handled the sudden attention.
She couldn't stand it. She really couldn't stand the media being around all the time and all that. But if you ever notice, actually, when she notices the camera staring at her, she will take a minute to wave to him, flick her hair back, smile or something, make sure her hair is nice for the picture. It's kind of funny. But she was pretty good with the camera until they would come off with stupid questions. What about the murders and stuff like that? Then she would go off on and swear horribly and give them the finger. She's known for doing that one.
What do you think about how the media treated her?
Well, actually, they were very terrible against her. We didn't pay no much attention to that with the media stuff or anything. It just was nothing that mattered to her and I. We just were ourselves at all times, and that's all there was to it.
In a letter to Dawn, Eileen's anger toward men in the media is also starkly apparent.
Did I look real skinny on TV? If not, well, I am. TV makes you look heavier than you are. I agree with the tabloid photos, but that was intentional by the males who took the snaps. Number one, because I am considered a whore, which actually men are more of. Two, because I had enough balls to knock off some rapists. And three, because women aren't supposed to pose such power and authority against an assailant. We're supposed to be abused, used, raped. Actually, I should be given a medal for it. I help society and other girls. Do I hate men? Not really. Just ones that think like their brains are in their ass and penis.
The anger will only increase as the trial gets underway. The stage is set, and Eileen's made her entrance. I want to know what the atmosphere was like in court from prosecutor David Damore.
Back in 1989 until the trial in 92, the Aileen Wuornos story and the methods of the deaths and the fact of the men being killed in some compromising situations took on media hysteria. It was covered throughout the world. I had been on some high-profile local cases, but never seen anything to the degree of the interest in the media.
What did you make of Aileen in court?
The truth is that early on it became very evident in dealing with Aileen, reading her psychological evaluations and seeing her in court, that Aileen really wasn't a robber. Aileen was a murderer. Aileen was a murderer who robbed, which is a totally different kind of person. And I can tell you that if you looked into Eileen's eyes, all you saw was anger and hatred. There was, in my mind, no remorse, no compassion for anyone other than, candidly, Tyra Moore, who I think actually was the object of her love. And there was some humanity, if you can call it that, in her feelings towards that other woman.
With the state of Florida having the death penalty, Eileen's life could be on the line. Her argument? Self-defense. During this first trial, her state-appointed defense team is Tricia Jenkins, Billy Nolis, and William Miller. Defense attorney Joe Hobson is involved in the case later on, but tells me about the start of this first trial.
My own theory about Aileen is I think she had the life of a street prostitute, and I really think after Mallory, she just snapped.
Tell me a little bit why the Mallory trial was so pivotal?
Well, first of all, it was the first. Mallory, interestingly, was a television repairman or radio repairman in Palm Harbor, which is Pinellas County. The shot across the bow at that point was that, they were playing for keeps. They were not going to let his past record in, and this was a little bit of the road. And, Aileen might have had hope back then. But after that, I think she just got kind of worn down.
And how was her demeanor at the start of the trial? We know she typically has a pretty short fuse.
I think compared to her behavior during the trial, she was sedate and relatively refrained.
And what was she like when the defense team would try to speak to her outside of the courtroom and away from the cameras?
Well, I'll be mild. Aileen was as crazy as a shithouse rat. Now, the state said, oh, she's just antisocial. That's what they say about all. I think she had schizoid. I mean, a lot of what she said is like, just out there.
This trial is only for the murder of Richard Mallory. However, many of the other victims' families are present throughout, and emotions run high. Kathy Sims is the niece of victim Peter Sims. He's the man who tried to help Aileen by giving her a ride, but was shot to death. Kathy spoke on the Mind of a Monster documentary in 2020 about how she felt in court.
At the trial, I was still very angry. And when I saw her, and she saw me. She was still in the saying that all those men were taking advantage of her. Even Uncle Pete was taking advantage of her, and it's not true. It wasn't true. She was facing me as I was in the seat to try to say what the lawyers were asking me. And seeing her, I was just overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed with anger and grief.
The prosecution makes their opening statement, describing Aileen as a predatory prostitute with the unbelievable claim that she had sex with over 250,000 men. The defense team maintains Aileen is also a victim who killed in self-defense, telling the court she suffered sodomy and degradation. The court is hushed and falls silent. Aileen's confession tape is about to be played for everyone to hear.
Good morning.
Well, I came here to confess to murder.
The court hears those words. I came here to confess to murder. I speak to David Demore, prosecution lawyer.
That confession, when taken by the police, was difficult from a legal standpoint because Aileen would ramble from victim to victim. And sometimes her descriptions of what she did to one man might actually be the description of what she had done to another. And so when it came time to cross-examine her with her own statements, you had to be very careful at that stage of the trial because we had not yet introduced any evidence of the other homicides.
But what about her assertions of self-defense? She claimed that Richard Mallory tried to rape her.
You have to accept a false premise. And that premise is what Aileen Wuornos described as what had occurred to her. But the fact of the matter, that information did not come out from Aileen Wuornos until she was meeting with her defense team, talking about self-defense as a possible defense in the case. And then, of course, talking about mitigation and defense of her case with a number of mental health experts. If you look at the physical facts of Richard Mallory, he was shot 4 times, twice in the back, twice in the front. It was obvious that the parties that were out there, the 2 individuals, were about to engage in some kind of sexual activity because of the state of dress that he was in, as well as the fact that there was a condom wrapper found nearby and a bottle of alcohol out in the woods with a rug on the ground. And of course, at that time, She never reported to Tyra Moore that someone had tried to rape her. You would think that someone who had just been physically abused, beaten, and raped would report that to the person who they love and they're coming home to. There was also another major problem with it, is that when she gave her confession to the police, she left out those details. She never offered them. I can't imagine a situation in which a woman is beaten, raped, abused, that she would not recall that, and it would not be one of the first things she would tell a police officer when talking about her involvement with that person, why she acted to defend herself. Because she was admitting that she killed him, she just forgot to put in, I did it in self-defense. I was being beaten, I was being raped, I was being tied to a steering wheel by my neck. That's just not something anyone could forget. That would be the first thing you would expect a person in that situation to say, yes, I did it, but here's why I did it. I had no choice. I was being attacked. I was being raped. None of that happened.
Dr. Jethro Toomer met Aileen in the lead-up to this trial and psychologically evaluated her. He deemed Aileen not mentally competent to proceed, but the trial still went ahead.
In the first meeting, her primary concern was basically explaining to me how she felt she had been maligned and she had been wronged and she had been poorly treated. And so in that session, I allowed her to have a kind of catharsis, if you will, for want of a better word, and she described all of the things that had happened to her with regard to her involvement in the criminal justice system up to that particular point in time. And that included things such as she felt she'd been mistreated by the police. She felt that nobody had listened to her, that people had made decisions about her without having all the facts. She felt that nobody wanted to listen to her side of the story in terms of what transpired, that they had made up in their minds that she had, for whatever reason, decided to kill him.
So what was her story, and did you believe it?
Her story was that Mr. Mallory had stopped and picked her up on the highway, and they had agreed that she would get paid in exchange for having sex with him. And she said that when she had finished, all he had to do was to pay her and she would have been on her way, except that he decided at that point that he wanted to do some other, I remember her saying, quote unquote, kinky stuff. And that's when they began to fight, and that's when he was shot. That's when she shot him. I had no reason not to believe what she said. It was feasible.
And when you were talking with her, how did she present psychologically?
She had a number of issues in terms of her overall psychological functioning. There were some what we call borderline characteristics in terms of her personality functioning, which means that her behavior was labile. It was subject to change. Her mood was subject to change. At certain points during the evaluation, she would be despondent, isolated, just terse answers, not very engaged in the process. And then at other times, she would become angry, and she would become hostile in terms of just talking about how she had been wronged and mistreated. And then there were other times when she would be grandiose and expansive. The behavior ran across a whole continuum.
Back in court, the defense is adamant that Mallory tried to rape Aileen, and the prosecution expects this argument. But Aileen is about to do something that nobody sees coming. Even her defense team is shocked by her decision. Aileen takes the stand in her own defense. The prosecution is thrilled, as this rarely happens. Aileen's now opened the door for the prosecution to cross-examine her.
I thought to myself, I gotta fight, I'm gonna die. This guy is gonna play with me, and then he's gonna kill me. He's already said he's gonna kill me. He's already said he killed other girls. I gotta fight. I just gotta fight for me.
Aileen has gone against the advice of her own attorneys. I speak to Joe Hobson about this decision. Aileen took the stand in her own defense for the Mallory case, which I'm sure her attorneys begged her not to. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, I mean, you're right. As a criminal defense attorney, I feel you can never get convicted on what you don't say. And people are always going to have that kind of saying in the background. But, Aileen was just a very definitive type of persona. She'd let it rip. Aileen was just not a very warm and fuzzy person.
She really thought it could help. I mean, if her self-defense claim was true, it would be the first time in her life she's ever had the platform to be heard.
People always think instinctively that they can talk their way out of anything. And don't forget, too, when you're first arrested or investigated by a cop, they're always going to say to you, oh, talk to me. Let's just, don't get lawyered up. Don't get a lawyer involved. Talk to me. I just think the best advice always is never open your mouth up.
And do you think Aileen was judged in court on the merit of the crime she was accused of, or more of how the media and public portrayed her?
Well, she was a female, which was different. And I think that really threw a little bit of a curveball to the system. We look to women to be the more stable of the population. She was judged on her status as being the first female. She was linked to 7, kind of gruesome type deaths.
Taking the stand clearly does not work in Aileen's favor. But what's the prosecution's next move? Prosecuting attorney David Damore. You had to argue in court against the claims of self-defense. What did you use? What evidence did you use for that?
Well, first, it was the confession that did not offer any possibility of self-defense or argument of self-defense in it. 2 was Tyria Moore's testimony, the lack of physical evidence that would have been consistent with Ms. Wuornos' now self-defense claim, and the injuries to herself, the bruises, the ligature around the neck, and being tied, if you can imagine, being pulled as you've got a metal ligature around your neck as you're tied to a steering wheel and being forcibly raped. You can't miss that. That's an impossibility, I believe, for my one woman to miss it on another woman. Even a man, I don't think, could miss that.
And David, what else did you use to argue your case?
We had the Williams rule, the similar fact evidence. That case was made. Was there going to be a guilty verdict? I was convinced there was once she took the stand, and I knew that I could bring in the Williams rule.
This is crucial to the case. In a criminal proceeding, jurors base their decision on evidence presented at trial. In the case of Florida's Williams rule, this evidence may include a defendant's past criminal history. It is bad news for Aileen. She's on trial for 1 murder, but the jury is also told about evidence the state has of 6 other men she is accused of killing, and also former weapons offenses. These are crimes that, at the moment, she is only suspected of. I speak to Joe Hobson about this.
Aileen's problem was there were 7. Those murders were brought in normally as a principle of pure criminal law. You can't argue other acts to show that you're guilty on this one. But Williams' rule says if you're establishing modus operandi, you can do it, and they did it. So they were able to introduce evidence of the others to show that on the occasion at issue, she acted in conformity therewith.
Dear Dawn, the prosecutors claim I pulled out my gun to rob, to kill, kill to rob. I did not know what was in the vehicles. If they had weapons such as a gun, well, I didn't know if they had it under the seat, close by them, or what. Antonio had a heavy-duty flashlight under the drive seat. Once we were in the back seat, he grabbed it immediately and hit me in the head with it. Batteries were inside. It was like a lead pipe.
Just weeks into the case comes one of the most shocking revelations of all. Tyria, Eileen's girlfriend, testifies for the prosecution against the woman she says she loves. David Damore cross-examined her on the stand.
Well, Tyria was a pretty matter-of-fact person. She really was a very good witness. She was not intimidated by the circumstances of being in the courtroom. She was not intimidated by Aileen because they literally were very much in front of each other. My questions to her were pretty matter-of-fact because remember, the focus was on the Mallory death, and it started off a little bit about their relationship, how they had known each other, that they lived together, and then it came to, did there come a day where you saw Aileen Wuornos in, I believe it was a yellow Cadillac, and let's discuss the circumstances of that when she got home. And, did she tell you where she got the Cadillac from? Did she tell you anything about being injured the day before, of having been in contact with anyone? And so we went through that scenario of recognizing that we anticipated the possibility of a self-defense argument. And so there really was nothing earth-shattering. It was just factual matters, but they were important facts as to, injuries to the neck, bruising to the arms or shoulders, concern about being injured, being threatened, being tortured, as she claimed she was. And so that was the primary focus. And then, of course, there was some discussion about the phone call that she and Aileen had after Aileen was arrested. It was important to us because without that, we really had no proof that Ty Moore was not more involved in some of these homicides, other than really very little evidence, with the exception of the two women in Peterson's little Sunberg when they wrecked the car, of her being there.
Dear Dawn, on the stand, when Tyria said, "I can't recall," I started laughing. I know Tyria like a book, and she'd never say those words, but instead would say, "I can't remember." Tricia and I started laughing. That's what is called rehearsing a witness. Just one big mess up full of lies and shit.
Tyria's testimony creates breathtaking courtroom drama. Best friend Dawn tells me this crushed Aileen.
It was the ultimate betrayal, definitely, but it also was what she had to do according to the state, in the law. She had to go up there and tell the truth. She really loved Ty. She loved her with all her heart. Yeah, that was totally the final straw for her. That really got too much for Aileen to handle, I'll have to admit. It's kind of when she got up and decided to tell the judge, just send me back to my cell. She was done.
Tyria has been the prosecution's ultimate weapon. The defense hopes for a lesser sentence, second-degree murder or manslaughter, maybe even life in prison. But now, a death sentence could be a reality.
Dear Dawn, they have to prove without a reasonable doubt that I was raped. But they did not do that. That is one of at least 30 reasons why I did not receive a fair trial, and also why I waived. There was no point in trying to fight a pack of evil cops in a county court system. They knew it was self-defense. The funny part is only God, him, and I were there.
As the prosecution and defense issue their closing arguments, Aileen loses composure, sobbing uncontrollably in the courtroom. The jurors leave to make their decision. Soon, Aileen will hear if her fate will be death, just like her 7 victims.
A lot of people say I should be ashamed to say I'm happy to be her best friend. But I'm not ashamed of it. I mean, that's what makes us such good friends. We show a whole new meaning to the word friendship. somebody standing by somebody, not for what they did or why they did it, just because they're friends in the first place. Let the judge and the jury and everybody else judge them. No part in my heart would have to judge her for what she did. None of my business. Our friendship is about friendship. Thank God for the courts and all them. They do their job. And if she killed my husband or my brother or my grandpa, I would want no less. You know, so I keep that in mind too.
She killed 7 men in cold blood.
She did not kill in self-defense, but instead was motivated by hatred of men.
There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I kill again. I have hate crawling through my system.
7 men murdered, only 6 bodies found. From 1989 to 1990, these men fell victim to sex worker Aileen Wuornos as she hitchhiked along Florida's highways. Some were just giving a woman in need a ride. Others parted money for sex. But they all paid the price, as picking her up cost them their lives. Over the course of 6 episodes, we've spoken to detectives, witnesses, and experts to delve into the case of Aileen Wuornos, tracking her notoriety as America's first female serial killer, and question if she, too, was a victim. Deep diving inside the mind of a monster, we've heard Aileen's innermost thoughts and feelings from letters she sent her best friend Dawn from death row. I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Season 5 of Mind of a Monster, Aileen Wuornos. Episode 6, I'll Be Back, I'll Be Back.
Dear Dawn, I'll face the music for whatever further evil they wish to do, as in executing. Go for it. I may have killed 7, but what I've witnessed in all this is that their sins are even greater than the 7 murders.
It's January 27th, 1992, and for the past 2 weeks, Aileen Wuornos has been on trial for the murder of Richard Mallory. She maintains she had no intention of killing him. The jury delivers its verdict after just 2 hours of deliberation. Count 1, first-degree premeditated murder, guilty. Count 2, armed robbery, guilty. As the jury files out of the courtroom, Aileen can't contain her anger. I spoke to prosecutor David Damore, who watched it happen.
Aileen screamed at the jury as she was being led out of the courtroom after the jury had just come back and found her guilty of the charges. And as she was being led out of the courtroom door in front of the jurors, between 2 bailiffs, she screamed out,
I was raped. I hope you get raped.
Oh my, how did everyone react to that?
There was total silence in the courtroom. You have 12 jurors looking at her, a judge sitting on the bench, and us, and I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not the brightest move you can make, Aileen, because these are the same people who are going to decide whether you live or die.
Aileen believes the jury has been swayed by the media. In a letter to her best friend, she makes her feelings about the jurors very clear.
Dear Dawn, it's basically men or women who are pissed off because a woman was screwing around with a married man, possibly theirs, or they've never been raped. Just fortunate cookies who've never been pushed or gotten a little dirty in life. A chance of luck of being raised in a wealthy home or a middle-class one. But put them all in my shoes, then they'd understand everything.
It's Florida, so Aileen's keenly aware that the death penalty is on the table. Before sentencing, the jury is given reasons why she may deserve a lesser sentence of life in prison. These are known as mitigating factors. One of the psychologists called to court, Dr. Elizabeth McMahon, said of Aileen she is, quote, probably one of the most primitive people I have ever seen outside of an institution. Dr. Toomer, you evaluated Aileen also. Do you agree with Dr. McMahon's statement?
I agree wholeheartedly with that particular observation, and that clinical interpretation of her behavior. Because the notion of primitive speaks to the fact that we have an individual who never had any of the supportive measures or protective measures that are so necessary in order for an individual to get an adequate start in life. So in essence, her behavior was very primitive. Her coping mechanisms were very primitive because she had no role models, she had no supportive environment, and she did not trust.
And in later psychological reports, you and other psychologists deemed her mentally incompetent to proceed, but the trial was never paused or stopped. Do you think her mental health was ever truly considered?
I don't believe that her mental health was considered fairly. Her delusions and other aspects of her psychological impairment tended to blend with reality, but she was incapable of basically processing information in an appropriate way because her cognitive behavior, her emotional behavior, and her overall actions were, in essence, fueled by her underlying impairment. She was motivated by her deficiencies, and those deficiencies left her unable to function appropriately. What we had with Aileen Wuornos was someone who was of a certain chronological age, but in essence behaving as if they were 10 or 15 years younger.
What we've learned through this series is how Aileen didn't kill for pleasure. She never craved murder like some serial killers do. To some, she was just lost, mentally unwell, and struggling to get past a life of neglect and abuse. Being knocked down over and over again, maybe a life in prison would be her only source of stability and security. I want to know if childhood trauma expert Dr. Tasha Jackson believes Aileen could have ever been rehabilitated.
You know, people have this ability to really change in the right environments, the right treatments, and I want to believe that. She shows signs that she wants connection. She shows signs of craving love. She shows a lot of places of hope. She's not socially withdrawing in some ways. I personally wouldn't want to give up with her. I would, sit in her cell and try to work on it, try to get her a new environment. I don't know. You can have her hopes and then there's reality.
On Thursday, January 30th, the jury returns to decide Aileen's fate, if she lives or dies. Despite hearing the mitigating factors, the impact that her traumatic childhood may have had on her ability to control her impulses, all 12 jurors unanimously agree. Aileen Wuornos is sentenced to death. Visibly shocked, she is sitting, shaking. Aileen covers her mouth in disbelief and sobs. Her defense lawyer, Tricia, gives her a hug to try to comfort her. As the judge tells Aileen her fate, he says something unusual, shocking to many, at the end of his sentencing.
You, Aileen Carol Wuornos, be electrocuted until you are dead, and may God have mercy upon your corpse.
May God have mercy on her corpse? Prosecutor David Damore. What was that about?
We never brought that up afterwards because none of us knew whether it was intentional or it was a slip of the tongue. And I can tell you when it happened, we all looked at each other.
Many were shocked to hear this. May God have mercy on your soul is the usual phrase. Aileen is handcuffed and taken to death row. Aileen is on death row, sitting alone in her cell. She's forced to come to the realization that her life will probably end here. Despite being accused of 5 other murders, Aileen decides to fire her current attorneys. Behind bars, Aileen is told by a friend about a defense lawyer who has offered to take on her case. His name? Steve Glazer, aka Dr. Legal, as he refers to himself in his TV commercials. He's a colorful character, but comes under fire in the press at times for how he handles the case. Steve hasn't spoken out much over the years. I want to know more about him and his involvement with Aileen.
Hi, my name is Steve Glazer. I was Aileen Wuornos' defense attorney through 5 of her murder cases. She had gotten my number from the public defenders that were defending Aileen Wuornos, who I'm going to refer to as Lee, because we all knew her as Lee at that time.
So tell me a bit about your background. I hear you're quite the musician.
I was at one time. I started playing when I was about 14 in New York City, where I grew up, and ended up working as an opening act for rock and roll bands for a couple of years, and put myself through college, put myself through law school, yada, yada, yada.
So how does a rock and roll loving teenager end up becoming an attorney, a criminal defense attorney?
Well, I grew up in the 60s, and in 1968, when Bobby Kennedy was killed, I kind of looked towards my government a lot differently. And I became, what, for the lack of a better word, a yippie. And when I got to be about 16, I remember following Abby into the streets of New Haven protesting because Bobby Seale of the Black Panther Party was in jail across the street, you know. Anyway, a long night turned into a riot, and it radicalized me, really. I saw the state, I saw the government come down on people, and they have all the power. And I thought that I'd be able to help something.
Help people like Aileen. How was meeting Aileen Wuornos as her defense attorney for the first time?
I was afraid. First of all, when those doors slam in prison, you know, you go through a lot of doorways, and this is an ancient old prison, and everything is real claustrophobic. So I was put in a very, very small room with a man killer, and so I was getting ready for a body block if I had to. But that my initial reaction was, this is scary. But we talked quite a bit, and I think when I left, it was a big smile and a handshake and a big smile. And we had an understanding of each other right away. And that's what shocked me, that this woman killed 6 individuals, yet I can be her friend.
Aileen admits to killing another man, Peter Sims, but she won't face trial for this as his body hasn't been found. Speaking on the Mind of a Monster documentary in 2020, Peter's niece Kathy and nephew David talk about the anguish this caused.
We have no idea. We have no closure because of it. And it's hard not having any closure, not being able to put flowers on his grave.
We would obviously rather have a body where you could bury it and just have a place of a remembrance of him, you know. But we don't have that. But a lot of people don't have that, you know.
Let's remind ourselves of her other 5 victims: David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Troy Barres, Charles Humphreys, and Walter Antonio. Aileen is due to face the courts over all these murders. But remember, she already has a death sentence. In an interview outside the courtroom, Steve tells reporters he believes Aileen should come clean and confess her sins to reach heaven. But he also insists she wants to die.
After she lost the Richard Mallory case, she said, "You can only kill me once," and that's why she called upon me. Yeah, she hoped to get to death row as soon as possible, get to heaven as soon as possible. I don't even believe in the death penalty, but it was her choice.
So she just gave up there and then. Did you personally feel that she was competent to stand trial?
Absolutely. I would not have stood next to her for a minute. If I thought she did not know what she was doing, if I thought that she was reluctant about doing it, I wouldn't have stood there. She ordered me to do something.
Dear Dawn, I know you've been really interested if I'm still waving my trials away, so I'll tell you right here, yes. There's no point continuing to fight a corrupt system. I'll only lose. But not in the afterlife. They may be fooling the world, but they're not fooling God.
Controversially, Steve advises Aileen to plead no contest or guilty in her subsequent cases, which are heard over the next 12 months. Legally, no contest is viewed as a guilty plea. It's an unexpected move, and as a result of this, she is handed 5 more death sentences. Her defense lawyer, Steve, insists he listen to her requests, which, actually, he's obligated to do. Take me back to the moment when you told the court that Aileen wanted to change her plea to no contest.
There was a great gnashing of teeth amongst her public defenders. The audience did murmur back and forth, but it was quite shocking. And when she said it, the judge had to ask her several times, "Are you sure you know what you want to do?" Lee had one thing on her mind. It was to get to the electric chair. I say that electric chair because that's what we had at the time. She didn't want to languish in one of those little 5x8 cells year after year after year after appeal after appeal. And so she said to me, "Steve, I want you to get me there as soon as possible." Well, there are rules, and I had to learn how to satisfy the rules. Well, I come along with Lee, and she wants to die, but I have to put on evidence to get her life in prison because that's what the rule says.
In the remaining court cases, Aileen deteriorates further, her emotional turmoil evident from repeated abusive outbursts.
Your wife and kids get raped.
I would ask that you would
Right in
public
the
defender's
ass.
office.
I knew I was raped. You weren't nothing but a bunch of skunk.
It's interesting to me because I know that she had said she wanted to die, that she was done. But then when the judge hands down these death sentences, she's irate.
She was a show-off. I mean, we were buddies. We got to be buddies. And she was a show-off, and this was her chance. Plus, you got to remember, she suffered from borderline personality disorder. So her intense anger is not something that would be odd. And this was her last chance in that court setting. Get on TV, you know, F you, America, I hope you get it too. I read and I researched an article I found from Georgetown Law, and it was called Volunteering for Execution. And I learned a few things. I believe in her right to choose her own destiny.
Around 1 in 10 people on death row volunteer for execution to avoid waiting years to die. So it's not unheard of for an inmate to want to speed up the process. But this is a huge leap from pleading not guilty in the Mallory trial. It's almost like she's truly and finally given up. I spoke with her best friend Dawn about how Aileen felt on death row.
How many times you gotta kill her? That's what she would say. So it's a waste of time. One's good enough. I'm going to be on death row till I die on death row. No more courts. I'm done with coming to courts. Which makes sense on her part when you look at it that way.
What did you think about her defense attorney, Steve Glazer?
He liked being the star. And I did tell him, after all this stuff come out in the papers, that as far as I'm concerned, he'd done the best he could do with the situation he was in. For Christ's sake, she killed 7 men. I don't care if you're Einstein as an attorney. Nobody's going to get somebody killed that many men off of death row.
And while on death row, did Aileen talk to you about how she felt about the guilty verdicts?
The first few times I visited her, she would say, I can't believe they're doing this to me. I'm a woman that was raped, and then she'd go on about some of the rapes and stuff like that. But I would go off to something else, like, come on, let's talk about other things you did in your life and you're going to do in your life. I didn't come here to sit and hear the stories on these guys. Write them down. Which she did.
In Florida, anyone sentenced to death is required to have an automatic direct appeal heard by the Supreme Court. This cannot be waived by the defendant, and legal representation must be provided. In 1994, Aileen has an appeal and is refused a hearing. The death sentences are not overturned. But Aileen argues her original trial counsel provided ineffective representation. With 6 death sentences hanging over her, Aileen has one final chance with her post-conviction hearings. A state-appointed defense team will argue for a new, full-blown hearing with witnesses and testimony. Joe Hobson was one of those lawyers.
The funny thing about Aileen is we were the same age. We were born in 1956. And at the time I was going to boy-girl dances in 1970, when I turned 14 and was playing soil basketball, she was eating acid and turning tricks as a prostitute. She did not have a very idyllic upbringing. Aileen never frightened me. She never threatened me. And people on death row have been known to do that. She was hard to manage in terms of, trying to, whenever you're representing somebody who is clinically imbalanced.
So with Aileen on death row, there isn't much going for her. What's the best case scenario for you?
My hope in Florida was somehow, if we could stretch out or elongate the litigation and tie it up, that maybe there would have been a change in administrations that might have done away with the death penalty. And obviously with her and with most people on death row, you're just trying to get it converted to a life sentence.
Joe, you were Eileen's attorney for the post-conviction stage, her last chance saloon, essentially. It's tremendous job pressure when death is on the line, and I can't even imagine the toll it takes.
No, absolutely. It transcends being a lawyer, and you are really their last gasp of hope. Between them and either the electric chair, well, they don't have it anymore, they have lethal injection. But it's the legal system cannot seek a more grave consequence.
Okay, so would you paint for us a picture of the day that you found out you'd been appointed to be on the Wuornos case?
I'm in my office and I'm looking at the boxes, and up beyond, I said, Wuornos. Each case has about a dozen boxes. You get a box from the clerk of court. You get a box from the state attorney. You get a box from the investigating law enforcement agency. You get a box from the defense attorney. Well, Aileen had 6 sets of these because she had 6 judgments and sentences of death. 6 that, even if we had prevailed on one, it's like the patient goes to the doctor, you get a spot on the pancreas, a spot on the liver, a spot on the lung. Take your pick. There were 6 of them. And all the state needs is one to carry out execution.
So what was the argument for a brand new hearing?
My defense argument was basically that Aileen was ill-served by Steve Glazier. Within the legal profession, Steve was a little bit of a maverick, a renegade, if you will. So certainly within the death penalty quarter, the elite core of people who do this, he sort of prompted horror, gasps of horror. The judge has to go on the record and find about a dozen or so factors before he or she can impose a death sentence. It was suggested that Glazier was unaware of this and just pled her. And he saw himself as, look, Aileen wants to die. Stephen Glazier basically greased the skids towards what probably was an unavoidable destiny of her getting executed. And he did so thinking, I'm going to cut through all the tomfoolery here and serve the client, give the client what she wants.
I want to know how Steve feels about the criticism levied at him for how Eileen's other murder cases were handled.
They damned me in my local newspaper and TV when this was going on. They even got a lawyer to get on TV and say, what Steve Glazers did is an abomination of law. Called me an abomination. All that bad talking, it just made me want to help her more.
You didn't charge Aileen for representation as she had no cash, so you made money through interviews. What can you tell me about that?
What happened was I got $7,500 over the whole period of time. Because people were ripping me, I had to, one day I went on some TV show or something, and I said, I defy anyone out there to prove that I had anything more than $7,500 from her. And that's all I ever got from her. I think she made 3 appearances for 10 grand, and she said, take 25 3 times. And that's what I did. People are getting all bent out of shape, a lawyer working for money. Oh my God.
Do you think things could have turned out differently for Aileen?
No. First of all, please, everybody has to remember, number 1, she's a prostitute. Number 2, she's very strong-willed. Number 3, do you really think anyone could have talked her into anything? Let alone me, some old hippie stranger? There's nobody in the world who could have talked her into this. So it is absolutely ridiculous to think that I had anything to do with getting her to plead.
Would you take this case on again, knowing what you know now?
No, I wouldn't. It cost me too much. I would never do this again. All I can say, I did what my client wanted. It was upheld by the highest courts. And what I may or may not have suffered from good or bad publicity, I'll never know.
Eileen's best friend Dawn flies down to Florida to see Aileen for visits as much as she can. Dawn also sends gifts, photos of places Aileen used to love, and of course, writes letters. Aileen is locked up, but it's the first time in her life she's ever had constants: food, showers, a bed, warmth. For Dawn, it was bittersweet.
Just too bad it took prison to get that. But I did make the last 10 years the best 10 years of her life. She was safe, not having no sex with nobody. It is crazy that they take somebody that killed people, put them on death row, and they turn around and kill them. That just doesn't make any sense. But it was the safest place she ever was. She had a nice warm bed, TV. I'd send her a new CD every year because she loved her music. And she loved her writing, and she loved doing that. And I made sure I sent $500 to commissary so she could get her potato chips, candy bars, whatever she wants. She would write things to me when I would say, oh man, we got so much snow here. I miss snow so bad. So I'd get my family together and I'd make us all go outside and make 3 great big snowmans and a sign in front of it, to you, Aileen, and take pictures to send us.
By 2001, 44-year-old Aileen has been locked up in the legal system for a whole decade. Her post-conviction lawyer, Joe Hobson, is told that Aileen wants to stop the appeals process. Aileen fired a lot of attorneys and declined other attorneys and said she was misled and that she just wanted to go to God. Tell me about that. Was she just sick of death row?
Well, anybody in that position the crosshairs of prosecution can tend to feel powerless, and the only power they can really exude is, I want a hearing. My lawyer's not doing the right thing for me, or I'm going to fire you, or I'm going to, heckle you, or attack you.
Going back to her mental competency, many psychologists deemed her incompetent to stand trial, but yet she stood trial. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, you and I know that that's a difficult standard, but just in general, in her particular case, and even when she decided to stop the appeal process, she was deemed competent enough to make that decision. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, is anybody competent to make that type of decision? I mean, look, Aileen was found to be competent by a legal system, was probably predetermined to find her competent. But where you're trying somebody for capital murder, it's I don't know that any human-based institution is capable of actually processing or promulgating that.
Okay, this is kind of a loaded question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. I'm going to ask it. I wasn't going to ask it, but I'm just kind of curious. If you had been Aileen's defense attorney from the beginning, do you think you would have had a different outcome in this trial?
No.
Over the past decade, Aileen has been deemed mentally incompetent to proceed with trial by a number of different psychologists. But on Monday, April 1st, 2002, the Florida Supreme Court rules that Aileen Wuornos is competent to fire her attorneys, stop her appeals, and accept her death sentences. In a brief, unanimous order, the court also fires Aileen's state-appointed attorneys. Her 5 appeals are dismissed.
Dear Dawn, they've changed executions to a choice now. I'll more than likely go for lethal injection because you're laid out on this table as if you're on a cross. Perfect way in my book for me to split in the name of Jesus. Sounds good to me. I've got a whole universe in Jesus waiting for me, so it's a serene thought.
It's now just a matter of time before her execution warrant is signed.
Dear Dawn, I'm writing goodbye letters. Why? Once a warrant is signed, there is just no way I'd be able to write them. I'll be so upset. I'll love you forever. Very, very much. Forever and ever and ever.
Aileen's death warrant is eventually signed. The day her life ends will be October 9th, 2002. Knowing she was due to die and feeling helpless, Aileen's already poor mental health worsens on death row, and her erraticism has become notorious in the media. 2 days before Aileen's execution, on October 7th, Dr. Toomer writes a final psychological report. Reviewing 13 years worth of depositions, plus court, clinical, and diagnostic records, he concludes.
Based upon the totality of the data, I'm of the opinion that Ms. Wuornos fails to meet the criteria for competency to proceed. While she has an appreciation of the charges, her ability to relate to her attorney in a meaningful manner and to testify relevantly is compromised by her impaired emotional and psychological functioning.
So this is 2 days before execution, and you still, 10 years later, think she shouldn't proceed.
Yes, I deemed her and I opined that she was mentally incompetent to proceed. She did not meet any of the criteria that we use in terms of rendering that opinion. When you have someone who is as impaired as she was, manifesting the range of symptomatology characterized by lability, unpredictability, and the like, there is no way that she would be able to basically bring to bear the cognitive processes, the level of comprehension necessary in order to fully understand and participate in the criminal proceedings, which is what competency speaks to. I just believe she gave up at the end, and from talking with her attorneys or what have you. That's just the impression I got.
Aileen chooses her best friend Dawn as her final visitor. It's the night before the execution. They spend 4 hours together, laughing, crying, and reminiscing about old times.
Well, I felt no sadness because it's something she'd been waiting for a long time. And I got them to open the commissary, so I know we were sitting there 4 hours straight, but she sat there and she ate enough, I got her 2 calzones and all that. And she also had a Mountain Dew and a Coca-Cola, and she had a bag of barbecue chips and regular chips, and a Hershey candy bar and a Snickers. And we laughed the whole damn time. We were so sore from laughing. But she was so happy when I could hear her as I was leaving the prison laughing. Best friend in the whole world, going on, talking to the guards.
It's the morning of October 9th, 2002. Aileen is walked from her cell and is strapped down to a table, about to be executed in a Florida state prison. That day still haunts her former lawyer, Steve Glazer.
I remember almost driving to the prison to protest against the death penalty. There's always people outside of Florida State Prison who protest whenever somebody is executed. And I didn't, because I figured it was best to keep away from any cameras or any kind of news, because I was always so closely associated with her. There was always somebody who was grabbing me for an interview of some sort. And I'm sorry. Wish I could have been there in the end, but there was no way. It was the end of an era. It was a sigh of relief, one that she was at peace, and one that it was over for me finally.
But Aileen's best friend, Dawn, is waiting for the announcement outside of the prison walls.
Oh, I was right there. I was right there across the street with all the people, just pretending like I wasn't me, because it was, I'm sure, the media that kept saying, "Are you Dawn Dawkins?" No, I don't know who she is. There's family members in that tent. I'm not going to go up there and say anything on Aileen's such a good friend, and she killed their family members.
Aileen is given a lethal injection, and at 9:47 that morning, she is dead. It's over. But for the families of the victims, their pain will never end. Kathy and David are the niece and nephew of missionary Peter Sims.
She was possessed by Satan, definitely. I prayed for her soul, and that was it. We need to focus on the mental health of the people around us, just like Aileen Wuornos. I forgive her. It doesn't take away the hurt, but I forgive her. She, because of my uncle's testimony to her, came to know the Lord, and now they're up in heaven together.
When I heard that she had been executed, I didn't feel any joy or elation or anything like that. I just felt like the last person in a tragic situation had died. She had claimed to be a Christian. And I thought to myself, well, if that's true, then when she was executed, she went to heaven. And if she did, I believe the way my uncle was, he would be one of the first ones there to greet her and welcome her. I believe that with all my heart, because that's the way he was. Very kind man who loved his God with all his heart.
She said, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day. I'll be back. I'll be back."
There will always be cases that stand out when we analyze serial killers. This one is notorious for a number of reasons. Aileen was a woman, a sex worker, and a complicated killer. She turns out to be, upon reflection, a layered and nuanced person. She stands apart from her contemporaries. She loves and hates. She's both victim and villain. A life filled with violence, abuse, and abandonment, coupled with unfortunate genetic risk factors, created a perfect storm. But no matter how tragic Aileen's life was, nothing can excuse her for taking the lives of innocent men and ripping families apart. For the police investigating this, it's a case that will stay with them forever. Brian Jarvis and David Taylor.
Our detectives kept in touch with the families, even for years after they maintained contact with the families. And your heart certainly goes out to them, but I can't say that they ever really get closure. I mean, closure to me would be having their loved one back, and that's not going to happen.
I felt a sense of relief that finally this nightmare is over. She killed 7 guys. The guys who weren't killed that gave her rides, I think many of them have counted their lucky stars more than once.
One last question. If you were to sum up Aileen, how would you describe her?
Evil.
Dawn always promised Aileen that she would bring her ashes back to Troy, Michigan, to be together once again. Her ashes are scattered by her favorite tree in Dawn's garden, where she made memories with the one person who never let her down, someone with whom she truly felt at home.
The last few years I looked over there at that tree. It's the best tree in my yard. I'm just glad everything's done with, and she's up in heaven. My MS has gotten worse than it's ever been. And every time the sun shines on me, I know it's Aileen shining down. Keep your strength going. And I'm happy about that. She takes care of me, her way from heaven. My message to Aileen right now would be, I still love you and keep watching over me. You're doing a great job.
Dear Dawn, thank you for coming back into my life, buddy. It surprises me we made contact after all these years, especially what I'm labeled as. I just thank you strongly for having overlooked all that. You're a darn good soul. The best.
Mind of a Monster, Aileen Wuornos, is produced by Arrow Media for ID. The executive producer for ID is Jessica Lowther. Arrow Media's producer is Harriet Mortar. Editor, Sirkin Nihat. Audio engineering by Mahoney Audio Post. Our line producer is Philippa Whittle. Our production manager is Alexandra Kelly. Our junior production manager is Jody Tanner Wild. Our production coordinator is Shannon Tunnicliffe. Our archive producer is Katia Lam. Our edit producer is Isabel Wilson. Arrow Media's series producer is Gabrielle Nash, and executive producer is Stuart Pender. Aileen Wuornos voiceover by Vicki Thorne. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Ward. You can follow our show wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd love it if you could take a second to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.